Today's video is packed full of fabric scrap DIY craft ideas that are sure to help you bust through your stash. It is a compilation video. All original videos will be linked in a playlist down below. Hey there, it's Donna. Let's get crafting. For the first project, you're going to need an embroidery hoop, a scrap of fabric that's in a circle shape, or you can cut one down into a circle shape. I had this one left over from a project. You'll need a heat pad, an iron, some other pieces of scrap fabric, and I am actually going to be using some fusible webbing for this project. But if you want, you can use a sewing machine. I'm going to start off by laying out my strips of fabric. These are scraps left over from previous projects. I'm just going to lay them out into a pattern over top of the circle of fabric that I have laid out. I'm going to cut another strand here, or strip, from this larger piece of scrap fabric and place that until I have a desired look that I like. I'm just going to make sure that the hoop fits nicely on top. Alright, so now I'm going to lay out my fabrics onto my heat pad and I'm going to iron them out because they were quite wrinkled. I'll do the same for all the strips as well as that'll make it easier to lay them out and add the fusible webbing underneath. Okay, so you're still going to need your heat pad, and this is the Heat Bond brand of fusible webbing. I'm going to lay my circle down onto my mat here, and I want to cut it down to size so it matches up better to the size of the hoop that I am using. I'm just doing a rough cut, and then you can trim off as needed. And don't forget, you got to save those extra scraps that we create for future projects. So I'm just going to make sure again that this circle fits with my hoop, and just trimming a little bit more off just so I have a little bit more of an even circle. Okay, so follow the instructions on the fusible webbing that you're going to be using. This is a thin strip of fusible webbing. It's what I had on hand and it's been sitting around for a while, so I thought I would use that. I'm just laying all my fabrics back down onto my circle, and then I am going to just play around with the placement just a little bit, move things around as needed until I have a look that I like, and to make sure that my pattern will fit within my hoop. So I'm just measuring out how much of the fusible webbing I need and cutting it down. It tears really easily as well. I'm going to lift my first strip of fabric, place the fusible webbing down, and put the fabric back on top. I'm going to do that for each strip of fabric. I'm just going section by section and placing the desired amount of fusible webbing down and then putting the fabric back on top. Now I am just going over this with my iron. It was preheated. The thicker fabrics took a little bit longer for the fusible webbing to stick. So I did add a little bit more heat to those, and now I'm just adding a little bit more fusible webbing where needed, just by lifting up the fabric and again placing another piece underneath. So now I'm just going to make sure again that my hoop fits, and of course adjust your hoop accordingly, and then you can put it all together, and I really like how that looks. So I'm just going to make sure that I have my closure at the top just so it looks all balanced. Once you have that closure all tightened up, you can then pull the fabrics so it lays taut at the front of our hoop. Don't want anything to be bulging because it does really affect the way it looks. All right, so now I'm going to trim off all the excess using my scissors. And again, save those scraps. So I wanted it to be cut off clean and flush with my hoop. So I'm using an X-Acto knife and I'm going right along flat with the hoop and cutting off all that excess, and I've got a nice clean cut. So I've got that all trimmed off. Now it's time to decorate. You can decorate the front any way you'd like, but again, dove into my stash of fabrics and I've got all these tiny little pieces. I also have some vintage buttons and my hot glue gun and scissors. So what I'm doing here is just kind of fraying the edges, and then I'm going to start to layer these pieces just kind of haphazardly in a stack. I am creating a really pretty fabric flower. I have seen several tutorials on how to do this online. I've seen lots of images on Pinterest as well as on Instagram for things like this. And I always thought that it was pretty. So I've always wanted to give it a try. So I thought today would be a great day to do that. So again, you just want to lay or stack different assorted little scraps of fibers on top of each other. I've got lace, I've got satin, and just some cotton fabrics, and I'm going to stack them until I've got a flower look. Of course, feel free to adjust these as needed. So once you have the size that you need, you can do this in reverse. I am starting with the bottom and I'm just peeling them down and adding a little bit of hot glue in the center and then pressing them into place until I've got them all attached together. Once they're all glued together, I'm going to just place it onto my hoop to make sure I have the right size and look that I like. Just moving it around until I have the placement that I like, and then I'm going to glue that into place. Next, I'm going to be adding a vintage button. I've decided to just kind of go through my buttons to see what I like best. You could add some little beads to the center. That would be really pretty as well. You could even do some stitching. I thought that would be really fun. I'm just using this button here, use some hot glue and put it into place. And I just think this is so pretty. It actually has a really beautiful spring look. For this next project, you're going to need some straws. I had these in my kitchen, so I just grabbed those ones. You'll need, again, some fabric strips from your stash and an assortment of trims. That I've got these chunky yarns. I think they're just so fun. You can get these at thrift stores or at craft stores. Also have some trims here that I had, just a bag of some scraps, assorted beads, and then you'll also need some fabric glue. I'm also going to be using my hot glue and of course some scissors. An additional thing will be a paintbrush. I'm going to be cutting my straw down and placing it onto the paintbrush, and that will allow me to have a nice little handle as we work on the straw. What you're going to want to do is take a strip of your fabric, add a little bit of hot glue to your straw and fabric, not too much, you don't want it to get too bulky, and then you're going to wrap that straw with your fabric. Wrapped it around, you can twist it to create some nice texture any way you want, and then you can just finish it off by trimming off any excess. And I'm going to be using my fabric glue to tack this down. I find that the fabric glue doesn't create much bulk, but of course use any glue that you would like. I also find that the fabric glue actually holds quite quickly, which is really nice. You can see how cool that looks. So now I'm just going to go in and I'm going to see if I want to add some other fabrics, and I decided to add this touch of, I'm not sure if this is like a lining for a dress or if it's satin, but it's a really interesting fiber. So I'm just going to fray the edge a little bit, and then I'm going to again use my fabric glue and I'm going to tack it into place, and then I'm going to wrap it around the fabric that we've already got in place. I decided to twist this again just to create some unique texture. Again, I had seen so many different tutorials on how to create these, so you can check out YouTube or Pinterest and see all the different ways you can make fabric beads. So again, I'm just using my fabric glue and I tack the end into place, and you can see how easily that slips off of our straw. I'm just gonna put it right back on. Sorry, slipped off of our paintbrush. Okay, so now I'm gonna try doing another style here for you, and using this smaller straw that I had on hand. This time around, I am just going to be using this simple cotton fabric that I had. And again, you want to make sure that you add hot glue to your fabric and onto the straw. I admit sometimes I missed the straw, so I had to go back in later on and add a little bit, but you want to make sure that there's a little bit of glue on the straw, otherwise the straw will slip out. So I just did a basic wrap all the way around, just created a simple cylinder around our straw with the fabric. I'm going to again tack it down with our fabric glue. Once you have your fabrics in place for your beads, I've got 3 selections as you can see here. We are going to start to decorate. So I am going to be using this beautiful mohair yarn that I had found at the thrift store. I have found so many cool fibers at the thrift stores, so you'll definitely want to check your locations out. So I just wrapped it around casually. I'm adding just a dollop of my fabric glue and pressing that into place. You can add anything you'd like to these beautiful fabric beads. So for this pink one, I've decided to add this chunky yarn, but I didn't really want those bulky little bits. I just wanted the parts that in between. And again, same thing. I am just going to be using fabric glue. I decided to add this really pretty shiny trim as well. So if you ever find that any of your trims don't stick very well, of course, feel free to use your hot glue. As I discovered here, these ones were not sticking too well with the fabric glue. So I just added the tiniest little bit of hot glue and that held it into place really well. I'm just giving my fabric glue a try again, but again, it didn't hold this particular trim into place. You'll see here in a minute, it came popping off. So I ended up having to go back in and adding a dollop of hot glue on that one as well. I found that these beads were so fun and relaxing to make. I thought it would be a great project to use up those little pieces. You could do this in front of the TV, which is a really, really great thing to do. It's very relaxing. Same with those fabric flowers. You could do that as well in front of the TV. So I'm just adding a little dollop of hot glue at the end of our trim, just so it doesn't unravel. And now for this one, I am adding a scrap of some lace that I had. Project like this is great to use up all those little scraps that we like to save. So I actually have another little fun trim in my stash here in this pile. I have some trim that's already pre-beaded as well as has some sequins, and I like the neutral color as well. This is great. It just makes it so easy to add a bit of sparkle and some texture. So I added a dollop of hot glue and I'm just going to wrap this strand around this beautiful bead. So for our last 2 fabric beads, I have decided to use some seed beads to decorate these. So I've got 2 different sizes of some gold ones, and then I've got some clear white. And I'm using this tool. It is a bead tool and it's got that wax nib on the end, and you can see how easy it is to pick up beads using this tool. You can pick these up at Dollar Tree, which is a great thing because those stores are available to all of us. I just added a dollop of hot glue onto our bead, and then I picked up a bead and pressed that into the hot glue. Just want to make sure you don't get too much glue into place, just the tiniest little bit. A precision tip glue gun would be great for this. So another way you can do it is add some hot glue directly onto our glass beads and then press those onto our fabric bead. Either way works. It depends on what works best for you. So I'm just going to continue to fill these with some beads. These clear ones look like little dewdrops of water on this beautiful green bead. All right, so again, you can decorate these any way you'd like. I think these all turned out beautifully and they are slipping off of our paintbrushes so nicely. You can use these for all kinds of different projects, or you can even set them aside and put them on display as is. So I thought I would show you how to use one of these beads. So I again went into my stash and I've got some trims and some fabric, some wood beads, and some embroidery floss. I'm just going to tear down my strips of fabric into some thinner strips, and I'm just going to remove any of those excess threads. Also want to just mention that I didn't bother measuring out the length that I needed of the strips. I just kind of went with what I had here. So if you have a long strand, you can just cut that in half so that they're a little bit more equal. And here I have them all cut down to length. And now I'm just going to cut a long strand of the embroidery floss. And I went with an embroidery floss that I thought kind of matched the bead a bit. Next, you're going to want to take your strips of fabric and your lengths of trim and just pile them up in your hand. And you just want to mix them up. And I'm just making sure that I have the green kind of spread throughout my gather here. Next, I'm just going to fold that in half. And then if there's any pieces that are kind of a funny length, I'll just pull those down. Grabbed my embroidery floss and I'm going to tie it off in the center of our gather where we had it folded. And I'm just going to tie a simple knot. So I did go ahead and trim off any little bits that I thought were too long. Again, you can save those little bits of pieces if you want. I'm going to tie a knot in the end of some of these strands as well. So now that you've got your fibers all in a nice beautiful tassel, I'm going to just get another strand of embroidery floss, and you want to wrap it around the top, and that will complete the look of our tassel. So again, I'm just going to tie that off in a simple knot after I wrapped it around a few times. You want to make sure it's tight as well. Really liking how that looks. I think it's just so pretty. Okay, so now I want to string our beads on. I found these pretty little green beads and these natural beads. I actually don't know the sizes of those, unfortunately. They came from some old pieces of kids' jewelry. So now I'm just going to take some tape and I'm going to put it on the ends of the embroidery floss just to create a nice sturdy end so I can string these beads on. Started with the little green one and then the natural. Now I'm adding my fiber bead and I'm using a bamboo skewer just to help poke it through because it got caught up on some of the fibers. Worked just fine. And then I'm going to again add my natural bead and the green bead. And then I'm going to tie it off with a knot at the top. So you can leave this string as long as you need. I actually kind of wish I did leave it a little bit longer, and you'll see here in a minute. I think it turned out so pretty. I think it would just make a beautiful gift topper, or you can make some larger ones to use as curtain ties. Here I've added it to the edge of a altered book that I had made a few years ago. I just think it is such a pretty little touch to this book. So I thought that looked so pretty, I decided to add another little accessory, or make another little accessory for the book. I've got my scraps of fabric and trim, my heat bond, scissors, heat mat, iron, and of course my scraps of fabric. I'm going to cut down my cardstock. It's a sturdy cardstock, and I'm cutting it down to 2¼ inch wide, and then I'm cutting it to about 7¼ inch long, but of course feel free to do it any size you want. I have this nice long strip of fabric. It was a nice beautiful scrap fabric. I love the color. And then I've got all these other little strips again. I'm going to lay them out onto the cardstock in a pattern that I like and using the assortment of fabrics that I like. Of course, feel free to do different shapes. I am just going to go with the strips. So now I'm just going to go in and I'm going to just kind of trim off a bit of the excess. Now you can see there I had a little piece of blue lace. I decided not to use it because I wasn't sure if it would melt when I applied my iron to it. So I end up replacing that, and you'll see here in a bit what I decided to go with. So I just trimmed again my strips of fabric down to a more manageable size, and I'll put those back into place. So you can see here I went with some tree patterned fabric instead of that lace. I think it is a much better choice. And as you can see, I also got my heat mat out. So I'm going to, again, just iron out my strips. It just makes it easier to lay them out and work with the heat bond. I'll also iron out this larger strip as well. This is actually going to be the backing for our strip of paper here, or our cardstock. I'm just going to trim that down to size. And then I'm going to remove any of the excess little fibers. And if you need to trim your piece down, go ahead and do so. I just made sure that I had just a little bit of a hem all the way around. So before I do any of that though, I'm going to put my heat bond onto the cardstock, and then I'm going to apply the backing onto there. And then I'm going to use the iron to put it into place. So you can see how there was a little bit all the way around the edge. I actually wanted that. And then if you don't, of course, just trim it off. I did go in and I just kind of evened it out a little bit with my scissors. Now I'm just going to go ahead and add some strips of the heat bond onto the front side of our cardstock. I'm just making sure that it's overlapping between the cardstock as well as the fabric, and I do that all the way around the edge. Of course, I go ahead and fill in the inside as well. Once you have that in place, you can then put your strips of fabric on the top in the pattern that you like. And then you can go ahead and use your iron to press it all into place. So our bookmark has cooled down, and now I am going to go ahead and use my scissors and just trim off any of the excess around the edge. I did go ahead and fray the edges as well because I don't know, I really like that look. So I did that for each side, and then you can either leave it as is or you can decorate it. So I decided I wanted to add some stitching. So I'm going to thread a needle with some white embroidery floss, and I'm poking the needle through the fabric and the heat bond and the cardstock. I have to say I should have pre-punched my holes, but I didn't, and it did make it a lot more difficult. So it did take me a while to do this, but I have to say I am really happy with the look. So I'm glad I did it, but I think next time if I do this, I would definitely pre-poke the holes. Using maybe an awl, that would probably work really well. But you can see how pretty that stitching looks. So I just continued to add the stitching all the way around the edge. So I did make sure that I ended at the back side. So then both my strands are there. That way here I can tie off with a simple knot. So again, you could just leave it as is, but I wanted to add just a little bit more. So again, I'm grabbing my little strips of fabric from my stash. I'm going to cut this pretty pattern. It's at the bottom of my bookmark, and I wanted to carry that color all the way to the top. So I just cut a little strip, and I'm going to create a little tab at the top. I'm also going to add this pretty little bit of lace, and I'm just folding that over, and I'm going to just trim it off here. And I'm going to attach it using just a tiny little bit of hot glue. And I'm going to just press that into place. I'll do the same for the back side. And the nice thing about using the hot glue is that it will help to hold that little knot into place as well. So I also decided that I wanted to add just a little tiny staple. I thought it would help to hold all those fibers into place, especially since this is going to get used a lot. So I added one to the back and the front. And then for another little added touch, I decided to go ahead and add a little vintage button. This is optional. You could add a little bow to the top or a little flower. Or even some beads would be a really nice touch as well. But I like the look of a button. So I'm just going through and just deciding on which one I would like to use. Again, I went with a bigger one, and I'm adding it with some hot glue and then putting it into place. I think it just turned out so pretty. Love it, and I think it looks great with my altered book. Okay, so this next project is fun but messy. I had a lot of fun doing this one. You'll need a bowl, scraps of fabric, scissors, saran wrap, some decoupage glue, a mixing container, and some water. You'll also need a paintbrush, and I'll show you that in a minute. So just going through my fabrics and trying to decide on the color combination and pattern combination I want to go with. I really like this minty green and these neutral colors, as well as that birch bark fabric. I have to say it's my favorite one right now. I don't have very much of it, so I'm glad I had enough for this project because it ended up turning out really, really cute. So I'm just going to cut my strips of fabric down to size. I'm actually giving them a little cut and then tearing them. I again want that frayed edge. I do try to remove some of the loose fibers, but I do want to keep some, but that's just by choice. I just like that kind of a rustic casual look. Now some of this fabric is kind of stiff, such as this one here, so I'm just going to crinkle it up a bit. That just helps to loosen the fibers a bit, and that will help the glue to soak into it a lot better. So I'm just going to continue to cut my strips of fabric down to size, and you can see how I've got them all piled up according to pattern and color. Next, I have my bowl, and I'm going to cover it with the plastic wrap. As you can see, it is on the exterior. I am going to use 2 pieces, but first I need to just put the one on, and I'm going to wrap it over the edge, and I felt it wasn't enough, so I went ahead and used another piece. So once your bowl is all covered, you've got your paintbrush as well as a protective surface. I've got a craft mat that I'm using. I am going to now mix 2 parts glue to 1 part water, and I'm going to mix that up, and you can see the consistency it has. I wanted it to be a bit more runny, but not too runny, because I do want this glue to adhere all my fabrics together. So once you've got a good amount of your glue mixture ready, you can then place a piece of fabric onto the bowl, and then I like to use a paintbrush. I find that I have better control of the glue, but some people will actually take their fabric piece and soak the fabric into the solution and then squeeze it out. I find that is really messy. I've tried it and I didn't really like the way that worked. I prefer the paintbrush, but of course that is optional. So when you place another piece of fabric down, you want to make sure that it overlaps onto the fabrics that are already there. Keep in mind, this is going to soak up quite a bit of the glue, and you will also end up creating a bit of a puddle as you work along on your protected surface. When you get to the top, you want to just add some glue and then press the edge of the fabric over the rim of your bowl and just press that down into place. So I'm just going to continue to work on my first layer, and as you can see, I am going with the neutral colors first, and then I will be going back in and applying the other ones. So I am almost done here, and I found that the fabrics did move around a bit. So while they're still wet, you can pull them and put them back into place and then apply more glue as needed. I'm going to set this aside to dry. I have it upside down on my Mod Podge on the craft mat. And as you can see, I also have a vent above, allowing it to dry faster. It's partially dry now, ready for the next layer. I wanted to partially dry it first. That way here, it would prevent my fabrics from moving around like they were. So I'm just going to try and figure out a little bit of a pattern. I decided to go ahead and add this green one, and I started to apply my glue, and as I was working, I discovered that it was absorbing a lot more of my glue solution. And that, of course, is because the underside is now dry, and that is going to be soaking up glue as well. So just keep that in mind. So I'm just going to continue to add my fabrics. And again, you want to make sure that you overlap your fabrics as you go along. So I'm just going in and adding a few more pieces over top, and then once you have your bowl all covered the way you like, you can then again set it aside, and I allow this to dry overnight. So it's the next morning and it dried really well, and I think it looks so cool and it feels very, very sturdy. So I'm just going to lift up the rim just to loosen it a little bit. And now I'm going in with my scissors and I'm going to trim off the excess. Now, I wanted to do it like this because I wanted my rim to be nice and sturdy. So that's why I chose to do it this way, but you could do it where you don't have it curled over the edge if you want a really rustic and rugged edge. So you can see I'm just cutting along the edge and made it nice and flush, and you can see how well that slipped off. I'm removing the plastic and you've got a beautiful little bowl. You can see that the inside is quite shiny and the outside is nice and matte. And you can see how it took on the shape of our bowl. I can't wait to make more of these. Okay, I wanted to add just a touch of decorative trim. So I have this braided jute twine in my stash of trims. So I'm going to apply that using some hot glue. I'm just trimming off the end just to give it a nice clean edge. I'm going to start off with a dollop of hot glue, push that into place, and I'm going to add just the tiniest bit of hot glue to the end there, and that will help to prevent my trim from fraying. So now I'm going to just continue to just work in sections, just a little bit at a time, add a little bit of hot glue, and then press the twine into place at the rim's edge. Of course, this is optional. You could just leave your bowl as is, but I don't know, I just thought that this was a really nice added touch. So I'm at the end and I just again trim that off, adding a little bit of hot glue and enough so that the end of my trim doesn't fray as well. Again, I just really enjoyed making this, and I am looking forward to making some more. I think it looks so pretty having some strips of fabric scraps that I had. I think it's just gorgeous. Some of the ideas I'm sharing today are seasonal, such as Christmas, but they can definitely be adapted to suit any time of the year or occasion. You just need to make a few minor adjustments to them, such as the following crafts that I'm about to share. So I grabbed an assortment of some different fabrics and I cut them down into strips. As you can see, these have got kind of a vintage romantic feel to them. I made sure that I removed any of those excess threads from those torn fabric strips. So this particular piece of lace is actually from somebody's dress that they had taken apart. So this is the sleeve. I needed to just trim off any of the seams that they had. And then I continued to cut this particular piece down into some strips that were around the same width as the other strips of fabric that I already had cut down. All right, so here's my pile of fabric. I'm just continuing to go through all of these pieces and removing all those excess threads. So all my fabric strips are all ready to go. So now I'm going to start to lay them out to randomly mix them together so that they are interspersed throughout. I am going to just pile them all up, and then I'm going to decide on how thick I want my bundle to be. All right, so here I'm just going to gather them all up and I'm going to fold it in half. I just again want to see how thick this is going to be. I am creating a tassel and I don't want it to be too thick, and there's a reason why, and I'll show you that in a bit. So I'm just removing some of the bulkier fabrics, and then I'm going to test it out again, and I'll continue to do this until I'm happy with what I have. So I decided I want a little bit more texture, so I grabbed this bag of some scrap trims that I had. This is like a scrap piece of yarn. I love the little glittery pieces in it, but it would be a fun wintry touch. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut a few strips of those and include it in my fabric bundle. Of course, you can add anything that you would like to create something beautiful for your Christmas tree. Once you are happy with how thick it is, you can use a string to tie your bundle together in the middle. I'm just adjusting my fabric straps a bit just so that they're facing the right way. I do end up changing that up a bit because they ended up flipping once I tied it, but I'll show you that here in a moment. I am using jute twine, but of course use any type of string that you would like to use for your tree. So I'm just going to tie this off with a basic knot, and here you can see I'm just flipping those fabric straps or fabric scraps around just so they're facing the right way so I can see those beautiful colors. So here I'm just tying the knot off. So I was actually inspired by my friend Helen over at Moss Cottage. She created one of these beautiful tassels as well, but she used hers as a charm for a journal. I'm going to have her video linked for you down below so you can check out her tutorial if you're at all interested in seeing how to turn this into a charm. But her and I, we were on the same page. We thought these would make beautiful Christmas ornaments. I have done a tassel before, but I did it in a different way. But I thought this was so much easier. So I went into my stash of beads because that's what she had done. And I am just going to find one. As you can see, this one's got a really large hole. So I needed that to kind of fit over the top of my tassel a bit. So I eliminated a little bit more fabric, but I decided to make sure that my piece stays together really well, and I added a dab of hot glue. Next, I continued to add some other beads. I've got this smaller one. This slips right over that hole of that large bead really well. And then I added one more small one, and I really like the 3 different sizes. I think that it adds a lot of interest. So of course you can add any number of beads that you'd like. Once you're happy with that, you can tie a knot off, and you want your knot to be really close to the top of the beads so they're nice and tight. And then I went maybe about an inch or so higher and I tied another knot, and that created the hanger for our ornament. All right, so some of my strands were a little too long, so I'm just trimming them off. And I also wanted to cut them on an angle. That'll just help to prevent them from fraying any further. And then that is it. It's all ready to be hung on the tree. So I just want to take a moment and ask you, how do you store your fabric scraps? I keep my medium-sized scraps in this vintage suitcase, and I've got them all color coordinated in these Ziploc bags, and I squeeze the air out of them so they fit really well in this suitcase. I've got all kinds of different scraps here. I think this system works really well, but I struggle with my small scraps. I've got this basket and I've just chucked them all in there. So I would like to know what you do with your small scraps. Maybe I should do the Ziploc system with these as well. I'm not sure. If you've got any suggestions for me or anyone else, please leave a comment down in the comment section below. I would love to know what you all do. I love the woodland look, and I found a really cool technique that I will have a link to down in my description box. Somebody made these mushrooms and they used styrofoam balls as the top. So I am going to cut this 2-inch ball in half. Use any size that you have in your stash. I'm using this metal lid from a candle, and it is 4 inches in diameter. Now you just need to adjust the size to fit around whatever styrofoam ball you're using. So I traced around this with a black pen, and then I'm going to use my scissors to cut it out. This ornament was actually inspired by something that I had seen on Pinterest. All right, so next you're going to need some needle and some thread. As you can see, I doubled up on my thread, and then I have a nice large knot so it doesn't pull through. And then you're going to do a simple running stitch around the edge of your circle. We want to create a little pouch. I do have another tutorial on how I have made some mushroom ornaments. I will have that video linked down for you down below. It's an old one, but it is so cute. It's definitely a must-see. So continue to stitch around the edge until you get to the other end. I did start and finish on the inside. So here's our little pouch. I snipped the strings off so they remained nice and long so I can still tie them off. You want to slip your foam round inside the little pouch and just adjust the fabric around it. And then you'll want to pull your strings tight and then tie a knot tight. I think this is coming together really well. Now this fabric has frayed a little bit, so I'm going to show you how we can just make sure that that doesn't happen. The golden yellow one is actually a smaller one, and I love how that one looks as well. You can do these in so many fun and whimsical colors. So here I've got a nice sturdy cotton fabric and I'm just cutting out a little circle. You could use some felt fabric as well. And then you're going to take your hot glue gun and you're going to generously apply some hot glue to the center and just around the edge, just to help prevent that fabric from fraying. So I wanted to make sure that the fabric stuck to the center, so I just pushed it in just a little bit. And then you can go to your dollar store or out in the forest and get some branches. I got these from my local dollar store. I like the little nubs that they have, and it's nicely cut off. It's nice and flat. I also thought these would make great mushroom stems. Aren't these fun? And it's in perfect style to what I do here on my channel, that nature-inspired woodland look. I love it. So I just added some hot glue and then chose the stump that I wanted and applied it to the bottom of our mushrooms. Now you got to remember, mushrooms come in all different shapes and sizes and colors. All right, so these are straight pins. You can find these in the jewelry section, and I also have just some thread needles. And I'm using that to poke a hole in the top as we're creating an ornament hanger. So this eye hook is about 1 inch long. It fits really well into the larger mushroom. And I just added some hot glue and pushed that into place. And then for the smaller one, I'm using an eye hook that's about 3/4 of an inch. And same thing, I just added hot glue and then push it down into the foam. And then there you have a nice little ornament hook. Next, I am just going to be using some thread. This is embroidery thread, and I'm going to just tie it off to create a hanger. Oh, I'm loving these so much. I'm definitely making more. I'm going to dive into my velvet stash to create some velvet mushrooms as well. All right, I'm sharing another Pinterest-inspired ornament. I had this quilt backing, and I also had this cotton fabric, a selection of cotton fabrics. These two are quilting fabrics. You can see that this one's torn a little bit. And then I also had a scrap of felt that I had started a project on, and it was a fail. So I kept it though. I knew I could reuse this piece. So this is the quilt backing. I am just going to lay my pieces together. I'm creating like a sandwich of sorts. So I've got my felt, my quilt backing, and then this sturdy cotton fabric that I am going to be laying on top. I'm trimming down my quilt backing first. I wanted to even out all the edges because they were quite uneven. And I'm creating a rectangle shape right now. So I'm going to take this thicker cotton fabric and I am going to be trimming that down as well, just a little bit. I am going to be creating a roof peak. That's right, a roof peak. So I'm cutting off the triangles on at the top of each corner, just like you see I'm doing right here. And then I'm going to lay my quilt backing down and I'm going to do the same thing. Now I'm not going to worry about this being perfect like for the quilt backing, but I did try to match up my cuts for the cotton fabric. So I'm going to just continue to trim this down as needed. As you can see, I did leave a little bit of an edge all the way around. So once you've got that all cut down to size, you'll want to glue your quilt backing onto your whatever fabric you're using. Of course, I'm going to be using this nice sturdy cotton fabric. Glue that into place all the way around. So once you have those two pieces glued together, next you're going to want to lay that on top of your felt, and then you want to cut your felt out. But we're not going to glue this all together just yet. I'll show you that here in a bit. All right, so now for our pattern fabric. I'm using this green one and I'm just lining it up onto the roof peak, just like you see here. I'm flipping it over. And then I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to just trace out the roof line. Then I'm going to use my fabric scissors to cut it out. Next, I will be grabbing that really pretty floral pattern fabric. It kind of reminds me of primitive country farmhouse. I think it's so pretty. So I'm just going to cut that down, and I created a little door shape, just in a rectangular shape, and I'm just trimming it up to make sure all the sides are even. Lay that down into place to make sure that I have the right size for this piece. All right, so now I dug into my stash of embroidery floss, and I chose this brown color. I unraveled a long section and then I got my needle and I threaded it on, and I made sure I tied a really good knot on the opposite end. So I am going to stitch this on, our roof on. You could glue it down or you could use a sewing machine instead, but I wanted that hand stitched look. So I'm just going to do a basic running stitch all the way around the edge. Okay, so I have the roof all stitched down. Now I'm just going to tie off a basic knot. I am not a professional embroidery artist here, but you can just see that you can create a really beautiful effect by doing some hand stitching. And if you make a mess, it's okay. This is all going to be covered up. So next I am going to be stitching the door on as well. Same technique, and I'm using the same color of embroidery floss. All right, so the door and the roof are all stitched. Next, I am doing some windows. Now, I didn't use any fabric for the windows. I just decided to create the window shape by using stitching. So I'm just going to create a basic square shape using the running stitch. I just eyeballed this. I don't have any measurements, but feel free to measure everything as needed if you feel that you need that. So once you've got your square all stitched out, I went back to the middle of the top, and now I'm going down the center of our window. I'm creating that window frame. Next, I just crossed up on an angle, crossed down on an angle, and now I'm going to stitch across the other way to create that T shape. So I do the same thing on the opposite side. Of course, that is optional. You could just do one window if you'd like. All right, so the original that I had seen, they did some beautiful embroidery work on the side right here. I decided that I wanted to create a tree. Now remember, I have no idea what I'm really doing, so I'm just kind of winging it. So I did a straight stitch up with my brown, and now I'm doing just some random seed stitching to create the trunk of a tree. So I was just kind of filling it in just a little bit. I did still want that random stitched look, so I didn't fill it in completely, but there are lots of tutorials on how to do embroidery. So if you're wanting to create a different look, then I highly suggest that you do a search to see all the different stitches that you can do. So I'm going to just continue to stitch my trunk using the seed pattern, which is just random stitches. As I get to the bottom, I did end up fanning it out to create the thicker base like an actual tree. So I'm really happy with how that looks. So now I'm going to go ahead and now start adding the evergreen portion. Now the first few stitches, I did make sure that they were kind of pointing down towards the ground like an actual tree would. And then again, I started to do some seed stitching to create some random looking branches, just like an actual tree. If you yourself do embroidery, then please feel free to leave any suggestions down in the comments section for myself or for others. But I do a little bit of embroidery, and this is something that I have done, which is again the seed stitch. It's really easy. Again, it's just random stitches. Now I did put some intent to this. I wanted it to actually look like a tree. So I'm actually really pleased with how this ended up turning out. Another suggestion would be to add an applique or maybe some other decoration, but again, I'm really happy with that turned out. So I am going to be stitching around the edge, but I end up making a mistake, and I will show you that here in a minute. But I first wanted to attach my ornament hanger. So I'm just using this trim that I had in my stash, and I'm just going to glue that into place at the top. So at this point, I am going to be gluing all my knots down to make sure everything stays in place and nothing will unravel on me. This of course is optional. Now this is where I messed up. I ended up gluing my felt to my base, and I wanted to do that stitching first. I forgot that I wanted to do that stitching, but I'm like, well, it's too late now. So I did not glue right up to the edge. As you saw, I was gluing on the quilt backing first. So I'm like, well, okay, I still have some room to do my stitching around the edge, thankfully. So I went ahead and did that. It was a little trickier to do it this way. So if you are going to be stitching like this, then I highly recommend that you do it before you glue all your pieces together like I started to do. So as you can see, it worked out just fine. I'm happy with how it looks. So now we can finish gluing all the edges down. So I'm just going in with my glue gun nozzle, and I'm adding just enough glue, and I'm gently pressing it down just so it doesn't ooze out. And just be careful that you don't burn your fingers here. My glue gun is a lower temp glue gun, so I don't typically have any issues with this, but if you're unsure, then definitely use those finger protectors. Those finger protectors do not fit my fingers, so I didn't use them. So now I'm adding a button. I thought it would be really cute to add a little doorknob. Love that, turned out so cute. And again, I'll have the link to my inspiration down in the description box below. I got this oval embroidery hoop from the thrift store for 75 cents, and I also got this beautiful sunflower fabric from Dollar Tree. I thought it was just gorgeous. And I thought it would just be really easy to create some wall decor using this hoop and this fabric. So I'm just going to take the inner ring of the embroidery hoop and I'm just going to place it in around on the fabric to figure out what image I want on the inside of my hoop. I really wanted a lot of the sunflowers. Next, I am going to be using my heat press mat and I'm going to spritz the fabric with water and then I'm going to iron it out because I wanted to get rid of those fold lines. But I didn't need to iron the whole thing, just the section where I am going to be cutting it out. I figured I didn't want to bother ironing the whole thing because I'm going to be folding it up again and putting it into storage, and well, of course it's going to get wrinkled. I'm placing the top hoop into place and now I'm just going to trim around this here, and that way here it'll be easier for me to remove any of that excess fabric. So I'm going to tighten up this hoop, but I had to switch it around because I'm right-handed. And I can tighten that screw up on the top. And now I'm going to just pull it taut. And then I started off with some scissors, but I wasn't getting all the fabric off evenly. So next I'm just going to use my craft knife here. And with having it flush against the hoop, I am going to cut it off. Now I am using a nice, sharp, fresh blade. I put that scraps aside because I reuse my scraps quite often. Now I'm going to use the raffia again, and I'm going to again just create a simple loopy bow with some tails, and I'm going to just tie that off using some wire. I'm just adding a few extra tails here. I really like that look, especially with the raffia. I don't know, there's just something about it. So now I'm just going to again tie it off with my wire, and then I'm actually going to use just a little bit of hot glue. And I'm going to adhere it to the top, and that's it. You can embellish this any way you like. You could add some leaves, that would be really pretty, or some ribbon, but I really like the simplicity of how this turned out. For this project, I'm using this balsamic vinegar bottle and some cotton fabric along with some burlap scraps, and I'm going to be trimming these scraps down to size to fit on the front side of this bottle. You can see it's a beautiful green colored bottle, and I had removed the label and all the stickiness using some Goo Gone as well as some soap and water. So I'm just going to use my scissors to trim down my burlap fabric first, and then once I have a size that I'm happy with, I'm going to scrunch the material up, and that helps to make the fibers loose so it's easier to fray the edges like you see me doing here. I'm just going to again measure to make sure I've got a good size. I'm going to be using a combination of fabric glue along with my glue gun. I'm going to apply some of the fabric glue to the back of the burlap fabric, and I'm going to use my finger to spread it out, but I'm not going to go all the way to the top or the bottom edge because that's where I'm going to be using my hot glue. So I'm just going to press the fabric down onto the bottle and gently smooth it out. And then using my hot glue gun, I'm adding just a little bit to the bottom and to the top, and that will help to hold the fabric into place. So I really like this casual kind of like farmhouse or maybe even Mediterranean look to this. So I'm going to now just flip it upside down and allow it to dry. Now I'm going to use this cotton fabric scrap that I had. And again, I'm just going to trim it down to size, and it always helps to kind of tear it as well if you're able to. But I don't know, for some reason, sometimes it wasn't working for me tearing it. So I just used my scissors. And then again, I would just scrunch the material up again. And once I have the size that I'm happy with, and again, that will allow me just to remove some of the fibers to give it a frayed edge. I really like that frayed edge look. I just find that it gives kind of more characteristic to the piece. So I would actually love to know, what type of projects do you create using up your fabric scraps? I have done several different projects here on my channel. I'll have those videos linked for you down in the description box, but I'm always curious to know what other people come up with. So let me know down in the comments section. Okay, so as you can see, I'm using my fabric glue again to attach this fabric. Of course, feel free to use any type of glue that you really like to use with your fabric. I know a lot of people like to use Fabri-Tac as well. I just got this particular glue from my local craft store. So my fabric's in place and I allowed it to dry well. Now I'm going to start to decorate this by using some stamps. So I have a collection of some different stamps. I'm also going to be using archival ink. That is a permanent ink. Of course, feel free to use any ink that you have that's a permanent ink. I'm doing a test stamp on a piece of fabric that was in my scraps, and I'm just going to figure out the placement of where I would like my stamped images to be on the front of my bottle. I am using a black ink, but of course you could use a colored ink. That would be really pretty as well. So now I'm just going to see how that looks, and I really like that. Now I do end up adding another little extra embellishment, and or an extra stamp, and I'll show you that in a minute here. But for now, I'm just going to use this stamp. It says Grow and Bloom, and then I've got this beautiful flower stem. And these stamps came from like Michael's, as well as some local dollar stores that are here in my town. Adding this little bumblebee, and then I felt like it still needed a little bit more on the top, so I got this other stamp set that I got in a magazine subscription, and it had a little bee, so I decided to put that at the top, and that filled in the space nicely. I'm using this long strip of cotton fabric that was matching the fabric that was on the front of the jar. It was just a strip that I had, again, in my stash from a previous project. I wanted to see how it would look with it being wrapped around the top of the bottle. And then I also added some jute string, just again for an added little touch. That would match the burlap fabric on the front of the bottle. And I was okay with this look. I will show you how it looks here in a minute with some stems, but I felt that maybe it was a little bit too bulky. But again, I just wanted to show you that option if you choose to do that. So here I'm going to show you with the jute twine, just a simple little wrap around just to cover up where the bottle cap screw marks are. So I'm just going to wrap that around again, and then I'm going to tie that off. You can glue this into place as well if you'd like. You could add some ribbon, that would be a pretty touch, or some lace. So I'm just going to tie that off with a simple knot, and then here is what both styles look like. For this next project, I dove into my stash of scrap fabric and I found this beautiful piece that's got these beautiful garden roses, and I'm going to be cutting some strips of about 1.5 inches, and I'm going to just scrunch them up to create a raw edge. Now you'll need several pieces. I love this fabric, it's so beautiful. You'll also need a tin from the recycling bin. This is a literal trash to treasure. So I'm going to be wrapping this tin up with these strips of fabric. You'll need a little dab of glue to start, and then you're going to start to wrap your fabric around. Apply a little bit of hot glue here and there along the way just to help hold your fabric into place. So I'm going to just continue to wrap the fabric around the tin. When you get down to the end, like here, you're going to gently start to bring your fabric down, and then you're going to continue to work around your tin. Once you get down to the bottom, you just want to continue to add your strips of fabric until you've got that bottom edge all covered up. You can trim off the excess and then glue that into place. And then I'm going to flip my tin upside down and trim off all that excess fabric that's on the bottom. And then you can start to decorate the inside. So now I'm going to create a beautiful garden bouquet using some full florals. These ones are from Dollar Tree, and then I also have some from a store called Dollarama. And what I like to do is just trim down the stems, but I like to separate the wires and then I just kind of interweave them amongst each other. I don't always cut these pieces apart. I just create a beautiful bouquet and it looks like I've gone out to the garden and picked these stems. There's no right and wrong here, just be creative with what you have. So once you have the desired look, you can put your bouquet in your tin and leave it at this, but I like to go one step further. Here I'm just adding a few more of the white flowers just to help break up the color a little bit, but I also always love to add a touch of nature. So I have these branches that I collected and I'm just going to stick a few sprigs in amongst my flowers. I just love this look so much. I think it makes a faux bouquet look a lot more realistic. And here we have this beautiful farmhouse garden inspired bouquet arrangement. I had this round of cardboard tubing and it was left from a tape roll or ribbon. I actually can't even remember exactly, but it turns out that it fits over my hand. So I thought it would make a really cool base as a bracelet, but it was too chunky for my liking. So I'm just going to measure out about an inch all the way around using pencil, and you can see I've got it marked out here. And then I'm going to use a craft knife and cut through and follow that line that I created. So it does take a bit of pressure, but I was trying to be careful not to push too hard so that I ended up collapsing the tube. Okay, so now I have enough here that I could make two bracelets if I'd like. So I really like this size. The smaller one, I'm going to set that one aside. I'm going to give this tubing a coat of this warm white craft paint. I didn't want the brown craft paper color to show through my next layer, but of course this is just an option. You can do whatever you like. In fact, if you want, just painting straight onto this with a really cool pattern would be really neat. So I'm going to paint the inside and the outside and allow that to dry. While that's drying, I'm now going to prep my material. I had this scrap that was left from a project. It is a piece from a valance that I had purchased years ago for another project and I never ended up using it. So I've slowly been using this piece of fabric for some different projects. I just had to cut out the seam and then remove any of the threads that were left over. And now I'm going to cut this fabric down into a more manageable piece because I don't need a whole lot for this particular project. It's such a beautiful pattern. I am loving it. So I'm going to just wrap it around just to kind of see what part of the fabric pattern I want on my bracelet. I'm also going to just trim off the edges to make sure I've got some nice even edges to work with. I'm also going to be using this lace that I had in my lace stash. I'm going to apply it to the inside of my tubing. I wanted something like more decorative on the inside as well, and I actually kind of wish I used this on the outside as well, but I'll show you why here in a minute. First, we're just going to apply some of our fabric glue to the inside of the tubing, and then we're going to smooth it out and press the lace into that glue. You want to make sure you don't want like a heavy, thick layer of the glue because it will seep through the fabric and kind of give it a chunky look, and it's not what we're going for here. So I'm just going to slowly add my glue, spread it out, press the lace into place. I'm working in sections. I just find that it's a lot easier to do. I had actually made another bracelet several years ago that was using scrap material, and I painted a cute little village scene on it, and I did some stitching, added some beading. It's one of my favorite pieces, so I thought it would be fun to create another handmade bracelet. So I'm really excited to share this one with you. So I'm just going to trim off the excess lace here now, because I've got the inside all covered up, and now we can work on the outside. Just a note though, I did add just a little bit of extra glue on the seam to help prevent the fabric from fraying, and just to help hold it all into place and give it a finished look. Surprisingly, the glue hasn't been taking too long to dry on all these pieces too. Okay, so back to our beautiful fabric. It is so pretty. It has a real vintage look to it too, and kind of a romantic look. So I'm just going to measure out the width that I have of my cardboard tube ring here. And then once you have that figured out, you can just cut your piece of material down into some more manageable strips that can wrap around the tubing. I am using a hard surface here, and I'm using this rotary cutter. This is actually from Dollar Tree, and it worked really well. I was quite happy with that. I'm also using a steel ruler here, and that just makes it so much easier to cut the fabric. So again, just going to cut this down some more. I ended up cutting, I think, one strip. It was too narrow, so I was frustrated with that, but it is what it is. You can see it's a little bit too narrow here. This one could be used for the other narrow tubing that I had cut down. So I really like that. Now I'm going to add my glue again, working in sections, just adding some of the adhesive and then spreading it out with my finger. And then you'll want to gently press the fabric into the glue, and you'll see how beautiful it looks against that cream color. I do like to trim off the edges just so I have a nice straight edge to start off with. So you can see how beautiful this is coming together. So as I'm coming up to the end here, I'm just making sure I add a little bit of glue to the edges. So I am going to take some little excess glue that I have on my finger, and I'm just going around the edge and applying that. That'll help to prevent it from fraying. Again, here I'm just trimming it off, and same thing, I'm just going to add just a little bit right to that seam to prevent it from coming apart and also fraying. So you're going to want to allow that to dry. Once dry, I've decided that I wanted to add just a little bit of a decorative touch, and I'm going to use these vintage buttons. They are kind of a plastic, or they are a plastic, but they are an older button. So I'm just going to remove the little circular piece at the back, and I needed to sand it down just a little bit to smooth that out. It's got kind of a vintage brass look, and it's got a beautiful rose pattern on it. I'm using a combination of some tacky glue and hot glue and applying those to the seam, and I really like how this looks, but this is where I wish I would have put some lace underneath, because you could see the seam of the cardboard tubing, but I'm still happy with how this looks. I just think it has such a romantic look to the piece. And of course, you could decorate it any way that you would like that would suit your style. I think a lot of us collect these paper bags that stores use, and they have their like business logo on it or stamped on it, or say a pattern that's on it that was from the printer. You can cover that up with some paint, or you could even glue some papers or some fabric onto it. Here I'm covering up this particular stamp. It was from a winery, and I just used some warm white paint. Here I've got this beautiful piece of stitching that my daughter had done years ago, and I thought it would be really, really pretty to use this to decorate a bag. So I'm just putting the excess aside. I'm going to save that for another project. I'm just going to, again, cut this down to size so it would fit into our painted area. Now I needed to paint over the stamp because the stamp was black, and since this fabric is light in color, I didn't want that stamp to show through. I also kind of just did a messy painting technique, as you see there. Again, just scrunched up the material, and I'm fraying the edges just to give a more casual, rustic look. And I have a little extra piece of fabric at the bottom there. We're going to be doing some stamping on that piece. So again, we're going to be using our fabric glue. If you want, you could add some more stitching to this around the edge, but I'm just going to use my glue. So I'm going to spread that out and use my finger to smooth it out, working in sections again. Working in sections allows you some working time so the glue doesn't set up too quickly. This is a great way to use any mementos that your kids have made in the past or grandkids. You can just take little snippets and glue it onto a bag, and then you've got a very unique and beautiful gift bag to use. All right, so I've got these handmade stamps, and this one says handmade with a little rose on it, and I am going to use some green archival ink in fern green, and I'm just going to stamp it onto that little extra strip of fabric that I had set aside. A thinking of you or I love you sentiment would be a really nice touch as well. So I'm just going to apply that ink to this fabric and allow it just to set for a bit. And then again, you could add some stitching to this if you'd like. I'm just going to again add some glue to this and then press that down into place. So I still feel it needed a little bit of a decorative touch, so I'm going to add some of the fabric that matches this stitching fabric. Again, it's just a strip from my fabric scraps, and I also have this jute twine that matches some of the string that is in the embroidery. Again, I can't believe that my daughter made this. I just thought it was so cute, and I'm glad I saved it because it's perfect for a project like this. So I'm just going to tie the string and the fabric just in a loose knot. It's actually a single knot. And I'm going to add some more of the twine around the top, and I'm just going to create a simple loose loopy bow. And then it's ready to be used for any gift. So this project I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and I'm so excited to be able to share it with you. I'm using some Amazon packaging. I've seen lots of people reuse these. I'm going to use some hot glue just to seal up the envelope part and any other loose bits that may be showing. Next, I'm going to be using folding it in half, as you can see here. And then I'm going to be using some white gesso. I'm applying it all over, especially where you see the black. I'm not going to bother going right up to the edge, but I do want to make sure I cover up any of the wording or anything like that, because I don't want that to end up showing through our fabric that we are going to be applying. Now, you could just put a base layer of fabric and then add additional decorative fabrics over top, but I wanted to try using some gesso on here. Again, this has been something I've been wanting to do for a while. So here's our fabric scraps. I have got a beautiful selection that I have chosen to use on this project, and I just love the variation in colors. Now, I have had some people say, oh, why don't you give us some more variation in colors instead of having everything matching? Well, truth be told is I use these items personally, so I'm going to decorate these things in fabrics that I like, but of course, please feel free to use any of the fabrics that you love. So I'm going to cut these pieces down into a more useful size, and I'm going to also just trim them up and fray the edges as needed. I am going to just cut a selection of all these different fabrics that I had already shown you. Some of these fabrics are like old clothing that I had in my stash or from old projects as well. So now I have these beautiful dyed papers that I had created. Some of them are onion dyed, others are avocado dyed. If you want to see how I do that, please leave me a comment down in this comment section to let me know that you would like to see that tutorial. And I'll do my best to do that for you this summer. So I'm just folding these sheets in half. I have 4 sheets of each. Of course, depending on how thick of a signature you want to create will depend on how many sheets you add. But I find that 8 is a tolerable thickness. It's not too bulky. I'm loving these papers. It's got such a beautiful pattern on them. So now what I'm going to do is, once you've got all our sheets, this is printer paper, by the way. Once you've got them all folded in half, I'm going to do 1 sheet avocado, onion dyed, avocado, onion dyed, and so on. You could do this with coffee dyed paper, tea dyed paper, any color of dyed paper that you may have in your stash, or again, I could show you a tutorial. So we're going to just set this aside once we've got all those sheets of paper put together. This is all nice and dry now. So now we can start to apply our fabric strips using this card and a paintbrush, as well as our fabric glue. I have this really long strip again that was from a previous project. You've seen me using these strips a few times because I had several of them in my scrap basket. I want to make a tie to go around this, so I need one end to be slightly shorter than the other end. The other end is the end that's going to be wrapping around this, so you can see how it's offset. Once you've got the placement figured out, you're going to apply some of the fabric glue, and I'm going to use my paintbrush because I want this glue to be exactly underneath this little fabric scrap. So make sure you add enough so that your fabric will stick. And then I'm going to just gently place this into the glue. You don't want to stretch and pull on this fabric. You just want it to go into the glue naturally. So I just like to work on one side, and then I'm going to go over onto the other side and do the same process. I'm actually wondering, are any of you into making journals? I would love to know, because this is something I really, really enjoy, along with art journaling and mixed media art. So if you're interested in any of that, again, drop me a comment down in the comments section. All right, so back to our journal that we're making here. I am now going to be applying just placing some of our fabric scraps right onto our spine. I want to make sure I've got good coverage around the spine, and I'm going to have enough of it hanging off of the edge so I can wrap it around because I need a little extra strength there. I'm going to, again, apply our fabric glue, use our paintbrush to smooth it out, and then press the fabric into place. Again, I'm not going to pull the fabric taut. I need there to be some give. And the fabric glue actually remains flexible once it's dried. So keep in mind when you are using an adhesive that you are using one that is flexible as well. So again, I'm just going to continue here applying my glue until I've got all my fabrics into place on the spine, and apply some glue where our fabrics are going to be overlapping. Some of those spots you may be needing to use a little bit extra glue, just so you know. So I have the spine covered, and I'm going to make sure that it folds nicely. Now I'm just going to flip it over, and I'm going to just fold those ends around. And I'm just going to, again, just add some of my glue, not too much because I don't want it to get too bulky in around the spine. All right, so we have our spine all done. Now I'm going to just start to work on the placement of my fabrics. I just want to make sure I have enough pieces to cover my cover. Cover my cover. Yeah. Anyways, so I did overlap or have an overhang on the bottom and the top, and I actually kind of wish I didn't do that, and you'll see why here in a moment. But I'm just going to continue to lay out my fabrics. I'm going to start off with one side, and then I will go ahead and work on the other side. Once you kind of have a general idea of the layout of your fabrics, you can kind of pull them off, and then you can start to apply your glue and your fabrics. Again, you want to make sure they're overlapping. I'm trying to create kind of a loose quilted look, just a really relaxed one. You can, again, add some stitching, and I will show you an example of some stitching that I had done on another journal that I was working on. Here, I'm just going to trim off any of the pieces that are kind of, I don't know, not straight enough. I didn't want them to be too crooked because it kind of looks funny. I don't know. Just it looked a little awkward to my eye. Also on the edges where the ties are, I do have my fabrics butting right up to the edge, but I am fraying the edges of all my fabrics. Okay, so now you're gonna see me just pull up my fabrics, and I'm just setting them into off to the side, kind of roughly in the area where I am going to be gluing them. Again, these actually don't end up going back onto my cover the way I had them laid out originally. You can take a picture of the original layout that you've got set up and then follow that if you'd like, but as long as you get the cover covered with the fabrics you've chosen, then you'll be all right. So I'm going to start to apply my glue, and I'm going to press the fabrics into place, again, not pulling the pieces taut. And I'm going to make sure that I overlap these fabrics as well and fray any of the edges that are going to be showing. Alright, so I have the one side all covered up. I'm flipping it over, and I'm going to glue down the overhang that I have, but this is where I actually should have just trimmed them off, and I'll show you why I should have trimmed them off here in a moment. But we are going to now again flip it back over, and we're going to work on that opposite side to create the same look you can see here. So I still felt like it needed a bit more, so I'm just going to add some pieces of lace. I'm just going to lay them into place. I'm going to decide if I want the white or the off-white that I have. The off-white has a bit of a sheen to it, so I wasn't sure how it would look. You can see that here. And then this one is the white, and I preferred the white. So I'm just going to, again, use my fabric glue and go right over the fabric and put some of these pieces of lace that I have cut out into place. I don't know, I just like the look, and I felt like it also helped to break up some of that pink, but allowing a bit of that pink to show through. So I have all that fabric in place. Now I'm gonna put a heavy board that's nice and flat along with some added weight. I'm using some paper pads that I had and allowing that all to set. Once set, this is where I'm like, okay, I'm going to use some gesso and cover up all that fabric that's hanging over, or sorry, that was hanging over. And this is when I realized that I should have just trimmed them off because I could have skipped this step. But I didn't think about it at the time. So if you do this, then I would recommend that you just trim them off. But you also have the option of using gesso to cover up that color. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm going to be adding some fabric to the inside, and that color was showing through and it looked really, really funny. So I allowed that to dry. Now again, I'm using my fabric glue. This time I'm using a paintbrush as well as a card. This is the fabric scrap that I'm using. It's a scrap of some eyelet lace. It's an off-white, and it was the perfect width and height for this book. I just needed to trim off any excess I may have. So I'm using a paintbrush to apply the glue to the edge, so I made sure I got it right up to the edge, and then I'm going to apply some glue using the card all over this panel, as you can see me doing right here. This allows me to give some really good coverage all over without too much glue or any like thick gloppy spots that will soak through the fabric, because it will show. So I'm going to push my fabric into the glue. And again, I'm not pulling tight because I don't want this to end up stretching our paper, or like, I need it to be able to fold properly. So if you don't pull on it, then it will still fold properly. So I did one side, and now I'm just going to work on the other side, and same thing, add the glue the same way I did before, and then press your fabric into place. And then I'm going to just make sure that it can still fold up properly. And here I'm just going to first cut off the excess fabric, and again, you can save that for another project. Add it to that stash of fabric that you have. I'm adding some weight and allowing that to again dry well. Can you see here it still folds nicely, and I'm having no issues. I'm going to just trim off a little bit on the edge, and then I'm going to fray it. I do kind of want a little bit hanging over because I really like that look, but of course do what you like. Now we're going to add our paper. So I've got this elastic string in my stash, but you can also use a headband. I'm going to show you what it would look like with my headband. This headband ended up being just a little bit too small for this particular journal, so you could cut down the journal a little bit up beforehand if you need to, but I still just wanted to show you what that looked like. And now I'll show you what it looks like with the string as well. So all you're doing is adding your elastic to the middle, just like you see me doing here, and you would do the same with the headband. But with the string, I do need to tie my own knot. The headband, they already had welded the two ends together. So I'm just gonna pull my ends a little bit tight here so I can create a knot, and there won't be too much slack, which is what you want. But you don't want it so tight that our journal will buckle on us. So that's what I was finding was happening with the headband on this particular piece. But this works great right now. So I'm just going to trim off the ends, and now all you have to do is slip your pages so that the middle of your signatures or your pages will be underneath the elastic, and it makes for a super easy journal. So before you finish this up, like I said, you could add some stitching, machine stitching like I did here, but you can just leave it as is like we've done here. You could also stitch your signatures into your booklet. I love this. I am so happy with how it turned out. Let me know what you think down below, and I also would like to know if you've made anything like this before. For this project, I'm using this candle that I had picked up from Michael's on clearance last year, and I am just removing the label off of it. I really like the scent as well as the color of this candle. Now recently I was at Michael's and I did see that they had another one that was similar to this. I believe it was called Sunflower. Anyways, I removed all the labels. I used Goo Gone to remove all the adhesive off of it, and then washed it off with some Dawn dish soap. Here I have a piece of some scrap burlap fabric. I have a ton of this, just little pieces that I've been wanting to use up, and I thought this would create a really nice rustic farmhouse look. So I'm just trimming it down, and I'm going to be using some fabric glue on the back side of this. Now, I wasn't sure how well this would stick to the glass, so I'm just being careful not to add too much because I don't want the glue to seep through the fabric. It will show on the other side, so I didn't want that. So I'm just being very careful with how much I apply, and I'm smoothing it out with my finger, and then I'm going to press it down onto the glass. Just gently smoothing it out and pressing it into place. And then I've got this gorgeous coffee dyed muslin scrap fabric that I had. I'm just going to tear the piece because I want a nice rough and rustic edge to this. I'm just going to cut it down. Now I don't cut it right down to the size I need at this point because I'm going to do some stamping. I'm using this archival ink in the color Potting Soil. I have a little bumblebee, a sunflower, and a saying that says "Home Sweet Home." And I'm going to stamp that onto this piece of fabric. Now, archival ink is a permanent ink, so it's not going to react with the glue once I use this. I'm also doing everything on a protected work surface, so you'll definitely want to keep that in mind when you're doing a craft project like this. Once I have my image stamped out onto the fabric, I can then start to cut it down to the size that I needed. I'm just fraying the edges by just removing some of those pieces off the edge here. If you do end up having to cut a straight edge, you can just kind of pluck away at the strings until you remove some of those excess threads to create a frayed edge. Once you're happy with the size, again, I'm going to be using my fabric glue and I'm being careful with how much I apply. I'm going right onto the burlap fabric and smoothing it out and then pressing the fabric into place. And I'm just making sure that when I'm doing this, I'm keeping my cotton fabric in place so I know exactly where I need to glue it down. Now, I admit that I actually think I should have maybe done a little bit of stitching around the edge of that cotton fabric before I put it into place. I think it would have been a nice little touch, so keep that in mind if you like stitching to add that before you glue it all down. I'm adding another extra little touch of some jute twine just to finish this all off, and then it's ready to put on display. So I had all of this scrap sweater left over from some projects from the past few years, and you can see that there's just like little bits here and there. I decided that I thought these would make really cute little mushrooms, so I'm starting off with kind of creating just a basic mushroom cap shape. I didn't follow a pattern, I just kind of just winged it and just slowly cut away at this until I got a shape that I was happy with. And I needed a piece for the front as well as the back. So I've got two different pieces here. You can see that the one has got the spots on the front. I thought that would create a really fun look for the front of my mushroom. And just a basic simple pattern for the back side. So I just placed the front one onto the scrap of the other one to get the shape that I needed. I'm not going for a perfect shape here. I'm just going to use some hot glue as well to adhere them together. Of course, you could stitch these together instead if you'd like. So I'm just going to work in sections and slowly just stick the edges together. As you can see, I only add some hot glue to the edge of each mushroom. Now you could do these in reverse and then flip them out inside out so you don't see a seam. But I kind of like just the simple rustic look of this, so I decided just to keep all my seams exposed. I'm just going to continue to close these up. And then on the bottom, you can see I'm only gonna add some glue, just enough so I can still access the inside of my little mushroom cap. So you can see here I have a little hole still at the bottom of my mushroom, and I'm going to use some fiber fill to stuff the mushroom cap, and that'll give it some nice dimension. Now I just get my my fiber fill from pillows that I pick up for really cheap at Walmart. I know a viewer recently mentioned that you can get those large bags of fiber fill for really cheap at Walmart as well. That's definitely an option, but I know not everybody has storage space for one of those large bags, so a pillow is a nice affordable option, or you can even just get some mini bags of some fiber fill. So once you have the mushroom cap all stuffed, you can then glue that hole shut. Next, I'm going to be creating a stem. So I'm just taking the edge of this sweater and I'm going to roll it up into like just a stem-like shape. Of course, you don't have to do this. You could use a little wood stem if you prefer. I thought it would be fun to use the edge of this sweater. Again, I'm using hot glue just to seal it all up and glue it together. I do just check once in a while to make sure that I've got the right size. And then I am going to just trim it down as needed. and use some hot glue to continue to glue it to the base of my little stuffed mushroom cap. So this was a really fun little idea to use up some of those scraps, and you'll want to stay tuned. I'm going to show you what I use these for in an upcoming fall video. Got this beautiful rusty old tin. I actually rusted this myself. I have a tutorial on how you can do that. I will have the video for you down in the description box, or feel free to ask me in the comments section. I've got some scrap cotton fabric and some cheesecloth that have been coffee dyed. I also have this strip of some cardstock in a natural color. I wanted to create a ring that is just slightly bigger than the top of my can, as I wanted to create a lid that I could remove, and I wasn't exactly sure how to go about this, so I thought that this would probably be the easiest way. I removed the excess, and now I'm going to glue those two pieces together, or the two ends together, and then you're going to see that it just slips over the can, and yes, it's loose, but that's what I had wanted. So I'm setting that aside. And now I am going to select what side I want to work on for my tin. I'm stabilizing the tin using just a few pieces here. And then I'm going to take this cotton fabric that again is coffee dyed, and I'm going to cut it down. I just add a little slit with my scissors, and then I tear it because I want that really pretty rustic frayed edge. Now, again, I do have some videos on how you can coffee dye your fabric. You can even coffee dye paper, so I will have the tutorial for you down again in the description box below. Next, you're going to want to use some rub-on transfers. So these ones are from Dollar Tree, and so are these ones. You want to select something that is going to suit your crafting and decor needs. I have got these particular ones. I don't even remember where I picked them up. Might have been from Amazon. I'm not 100% sure. I've had them in my stash for quite a while, so we'll see how well they work. I really like this right here. It says Vintage Market. You can see how there are so many different designs on this sheet. So I'm using a craft knife and gently just cutting it out around the Vintage Market logo. And then I can still have all the rest of this sheet to use for some other projects. So just so you know too, I had a quick look on Amazon, and there's lots of rub-on transfers to select from there as well. So my fabric piece was a little too big for my Vintage Market logo, so I'm just going to cut it down to size, remove any of the excess fibers, and if you need to remove a few more just to create a nice frayed edge, just go ahead and do that as well, like I just did. I like the way that looks a whole lot better. So to apply the fabric to the can, I'm using some matte Decoupaged glue. Feel free to use any brand of some Decoupaged glue that you really like. I'm leaving the fabric into place on the can, and then I'm being careful just to get the glue right underneath that fabric piece. I don't want to coat my entire can with the Decoupaged glue because it will change the appearance of the can. Feel free to cover the whole piece if you'd like. It will stop it from continuing to rust because the technique that I did on here will cause it to continue to rust. And also, if you cover it with some Decoupaged glue, I do believe it will kind of create a waxy look, which is something that is a vintage look. They did that back in the day to help seal things up. So I finished decoupaging my fabric in place. And now I decided while the glue was still wet to put my vintage label into place to see if I could get it to transfer into the glue while it was wet. I'm using my craft stick here just to rub onto the transfer, and it didn't work. So I'm like, well, it's gonna end up wrecking if I don't put it back and I'll just allow it to dry. So I went ahead and did that. I thought worst case scenario, I could just leave the paper intact and it will kind of create an old look, but I'll show you that here in a moment. In the meantime, while that is drying, I'm cutting some cheesecloth that I had coffee dyed as well. I'm cutting it down and I'm going to layer about 4 pieces on top of each other, but I just needed to just get a rough size here for the top of my tin. And like I said, I do layer all the 4 pieces on top of each other. Now that I have all my pieces, I'm going to take that cardstock circle that I had created, place it in the center of the cheesecloth, and now I'm adding glue, hot glue on the edge, and lifting the cheesecloth and pressing it into the glue. Now I am being careful not to burn my fingers, but the glue will seep through the layers of the cheesecloth and help hold it all together. So I'm just going to continue to go around with my hot glue, lifting the edges of the fabric into place around the cardboard circle. You can see I created a lid with just doing that, and it works actually quite well. I wanted to be able to use this tin to store some things in it, so that's why I chose to create a lid. But if you don't want to do that, that's totally fine. I would just glue the cheesecloth directly to the tin. To help stabilize everything and also add a decorative touch, I decided to add some simple jute twine. I just wrapped it around a few times and then tied it off with a simple knot. You can remove the tails of your knot, shorten them a bit, or leave them long, whichever look you like. I prefer to shorten mine just a little bit. I do end up trimming off some of the cheesecloth a little bit later here, and before I do all that though, I decided I'm going to glue the string into place by just adding a little bit of hot glue here and there, and that helped to stabilize that string in place. I love how this looks, it's so cool. So I tested out the rub-on transfer again, and this time the transfer held in place. Now, you can see some of it did kind of lift off a little bit, but I think that's just because these transfers are old, but this actually worked quite well. And actually some of the wax that was on the paper actually got left behind as well. So I didn't quite look like how that looked. So I'm going over the entire label again with some decoupage glue, and that helped to blend out that waxy texture that was left behind from the transfer. I don't think you can get any more rustic than this. I love how it turned out, and I think it's going to be a great storage piece as well. This is a project I've been wanting to try out for a while. You're going to need some wood slices and a wood stump. I found the wood stump at Dollar Tree. I've got some larger wood slices that I got from my local dollar store, and a branch that I had foraged out on one of my foraging adventures. If you're ever interested in checking out some foraging videos for crafting, I've got lots of videos for you. Again, playlist in the description box, or feel free to ask me for the link. I'm trimming down the branch so it looks a little bit more in proportion with the wood slices that I've got here. So I'm just going to be using my pruning shears to do that. I'm trying to get the top and the bottom as flat as possible. I did struggle a little bit, so what I decided to do is get some sandpaper, and I just sanded those little nubs down on each end just to try and get it as flat as possible. So I noticed some of the bark was coming off, so I just decided to take my knife and removed all of the bark. That way here it'll help to prevent that from happening any further, and also kind of created a nice look to the branch anyways. There was a little bit of a nub left, so I'm just using my sandpaper to remove that as well. I'm using a combination of some Gorilla hot glue sticks as well as some tacky glue, but you can use some wood glue if you'd like as well. I'm going to start to glue these pieces together, so I'm just adding a little bit of tacky glue and then finishing it off with my hot glue, and that will create the long-term hole as well as the immediate hole. Gluing the little little stump into place in the center of the wood slices, and then I'm going to set it aside and allow the wet glue to set up. And I do the same thing for the larger pieces as well. As you can see, I am creating some spools. I have been really wanting to try this for a while now, and I thought, this is going to be the perfect project to try this out. So my little branch here was a little bit offset, and so I added a little bit of hot glue, put the branch into place, and then went in with my wet glue and filled in any of the spaces. So while that's all setting up, I have got this large piece of scrap fabric. I'm just removing the thick trim. I'm ripping it down the center because there was already a cut line there. And now what I'm going to do is actually just cut a little piece here and then tear it all the way down almost to the end, not all the way through. What I'm doing is creating a nice long strip to use it as like a ribbon or tie for say a gift or whatever, just something that can be put aside as a decorative piece. And I did remove any of the loose strings. I wanted this to be frayed, so that's why I am not cutting a straight line. I am tearing it. I like the way that looks. If you don't have a nice long strip of fabric like this to create your own trim, then you could use actual trim that you buy, like ribbon or like some kind of yarn or string, anything you'd like on those spools. But of course I am trying to use up some more of my scrap fabrics. I've got so many to use up, so definitely stay tuned. More future projects to come using up some fabric scraps. I'm going to continue to work on this fabric until I get two nice long strips of this trim. I already had some natural pieces, natural cotton fabric that was already tore down to a nice usable size. So I'm just going to wrap that around the smaller spool. And then I've got some short straight pins to help hold the fabric trim in place. And isn't that cute? It turned out so well. And then for the larger one, I'm going to just start to wrap my trim around that I had made. And then once I get to one of the joints where I had cut almost all the way through, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't all twisted because as you can see, it is all twisted up. So I'm just being careful here, untwisting that and then continuing to wrap it around to help it to stay in place facing the right way. I also have my other piece that I'm going to incorporate because I did have two long strips here. So I'm just going to put that in place and then start to wrap it around until I've got my spool almost filled up. I didn't fill it up right all the way, but of course, if you'd like to, you can. I'm really happy with how these turned out. I think I definitely want to make some more because I think this would be great to store some yarn or some string on as well. Dollar Tree has these beautiful glass plates. They're nice and simple and the label comes off so easily. So I'm just going to peel that off and no residue was left behind. But you can clean it off with a little bit of vinegar and water if you'd like. Again, I'm going to be using these rub-on transfers that I have in my stash. This time, this one's a bit more of a botanical and like critters and fruit and vegetables. I selected this owl out of all the images. I thought it would look so cool on the plate. So again, I'm just using my craft knife and I'm carefully cutting around the owl. So I'm leaving all the other images available for me to use for future projects. So once you have your image selected, I'm going to flip my transfer upside down onto the back side of the plate. I'm going to just make sure it's centered before I carry on. I like the way that looks. So now I'm going to tape it into place. Now my transfer does have a little bit of a waxy texture, so the tape didn't stick down the best, but it did the trick for my needs. Added a little bit here, and I'm going to pull the transfer a little bit tight just to make sure it's laying nice and flat against the glass. So I did add tape all the way around the edge. Now I'm taking my craft stick and I'm going to rub it over the image until you can see that there's a bit of a cloudy look to the backside of the transfer. That means that the transfer has rubbed onto the surface that you are applying this to. Now these transfers, as I had mentioned before, are a little old, so I did notice that not all of the transfer was adhering to the glass plate. And I knew that was a bit of a risk, but I just continued to work on it. And I thought, if anything, it would just create kind of an aged look, which is kind of the look I'm wanting to go for anyway. So I'll just continue to work on the owl, remove all the tape. You can see here, the center, there was a little bit left, but it wasn't to the point that it was affecting the way the owl looked. So now I've got this nice natural cotton fabric. It's a thinner fabric. It's actually an old sheet. I'm going to be using my Decoupaged glue on the back side of the plate. Starting with the flat side, I'm being generous with the amount of Decoupaged glue that I am using because the fabric is actually going to absorb quite a bit. I also found that it was easiest if I used a thinner fabric such as this. I found that then the fabric actually didn't wrinkle as I was applying it to the plate. Once this is in place, I'm now going to go over the entire piece with decoupage over top, again being very generous. There were a few spots, as I discovered after it had dried, where I didn't apply enough glue, and it definitely makes a difference. So make sure you're generous with your glue. I'm going to go ahead now and just continue to add my glue and then seal it all up. So I'm going to set this aside and allow it to dry well before I trim off any of the excess. But you can see there's a few spots where I did not add enough glue, and it definitely kind of gives an odd look on the back side, but it looked okay on the front side. Now I'm just going to use my craft knife and I'm going to go around the edge of my plate and cut off all that extra fabric. Once you have all that excess removed, you can go around the edge and use some scissors and just cut off any little bits of fiber that might still be remaining. I'm adding a bit of decoupage glue to a little container, and then I'm going to be mixing in some water. It's about 2 parts glue to 1 part water. Mixing that together, and then I'm going to go over the fabric again. I'm hoping that I can get rid of that odd texture or look where the fabric didn't fully adhere to the plate. I'm just lifting up any edges here that may not be sticking down and adding some glue underneath. As this dries, it is going to have a bit of a translucent look, so you can seal it up. I'm also going to seal it with some clear spray or varnish, but you can see how beautiful this looks. I love how it turned out. I had all these strips of fabric left over from some previous projects, and I wanted to try and use a bunch of them up. Also have this branch. I'm just going to cut it down to length. And then I also have some jute twine. So I'm just going to go ahead and just use my snips to cut my branch down. For my jute twine, I'm going to just measure a piece out, and I'm forming a loop. And I wanted to just loosely tie it on the one end so I know how long I want my loop to be. And then I'm going to just go ahead and just cut the string that way here. I know I have exactly the amount that I need and I have the look that I'm going to be going for. With my scraps, you just need a nice long piece, and you want an assortment of some textures and some patterns. One thing I will say is that for this, the thinner the fabric, the easier it is to tie it onto your string. So you want to bend your strip in half or fold it in half. This is a thicker piece and I did end up struggling with it. Put the loop on one side and then pull those two tails through your loop, and that will tie it around your string. I'm going to pull that tight. And I've got another nice thin strip here. And again, like I said, it works way better. Fold the fabric in half and then pull those tails through on the other side of your twine. So once you've got it all nice and filled up here, you can go ahead and move the knotted fabric, along the string until you've got it roughly in the middle, because we need to tie this onto our branch. I also wanted to add another decorative touch. So I have some natural wood beads. I'm going to put those onto the end. You can add a little bit of glue onto the end of your string to help you just thread your beads onto your string. You can also add a bead in between each of your knots of fabric as you're tying your fabric onto the string. That's a really pretty touch as well. I just wanted to have some of these beads on the end. I also want to mention that I did remove that thicker fabric that I had used. I just didn't like the way it looked and I was struggling with getting that tied on as well. So I just decided to get rid of it. I'm going to now tie the one end of our string onto my branch, and I'm just going to do a basic knot. And then I'm going to go ahead and tie the other side onto the branch as well. And feel free to move anything around as needed to make it easier for you to apply the string onto your branch. I wanted to create a hanger for this piece, so I'm just using my jute twine again. I'm tying it on to the other end, and then I'm going to create again a loop for my hanger and tying it on to the opposite end. Before I carry on, I decided I wanted to trim off the excess little bits that are on the end. I tried to tear them off, but I struggled with that a little bit. So I just went ahead and used my scissors and trimmed off the excess. Now you can see I'm just checking to make sure that this is hanging properly. And now I'm going to go in and add a little bit of hot glue to help stabilize those knots and also stabilize the strings on my branch. That will help to keep it hanging properly. I'm also going to be trimming off the excess string, and I'm going to add some hot glue on all the knots to make sure it all holds together and does not fall apart on me. This was an amazing piece to use up all those strips of fabric that I had. I love how it turned out. I picked up some wood slices that were approximately 3 to 3.5 inches in diameter, and I got these from the dollar store. You can get these at several different places, even online. I also had this beautiful fabric that I picked up from Dollar Tree. You can see that it's got like some round motifs of flowers and mandalas, and they are going to fit perfectly on the wood slice. I also got this other fabric. It's got a beautiful pattern just to show you that there's different ways that you can do this project if you'd like. I'm going to place the fabric upside down and I'm putting my wood slice over top of the images, and I'm going to trace around the wood slices. That way here I am able to cut this out so it fits onto the wood slice, and of course you can make adjustments accordingly by trimming off any excess fabric. But first, I placed the fabric on top of the wood slice just to see where I needed to trim any of the excess off, and then I did so accordingly. So as I was working, I came up with a little trick. I placed my wood slice over the image, and then I just moved my wood slice around until the image was centered onto my wood slice. I held that into place, flipped it back over, and then I traced around it again. I found that it worked a whole lot better, and I was able to get my image nicely centered. So I'm making a total of 4 wood slices. I'm going to be using this outdoor Mod Podge with some water to adhere the fabric to the wood slices. Now you can get this off of Amazon or in any craft store. I am going approximately 2 parts glue to 1 part water. You just want to make this to be a little bit more liquidy because then it will really absorb into the fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and just place them onto the wood slice, and then I'm going to put my fabric into place. I'm going to just press that down. If you happen to not trim off your fabric right, you can still trim some off at this point before it sets. So I'm going to go ahead and add some of that decoupage over top, and then I'm going to allow it to dry well. You want to make sure it's well saturated, and you want to make sure that the edges are nicely sealed up as well. So these are all dry now. I'm going to go over top of these again. This time I'm using the decoupage glue straight out of the container. I'm not watering it down. I want to make sure that this has got a good protective layer on it. Now it does say that this is not weather resistant. It is a water-based product, so you will not want to keep these outside out in the elements. If you do, you can use this matte UV resistant spray from Krylon, and it will protect your items. They turn out beautiful. I can't wait. I'm going to be gifting these to a loved one. I picked up this clay pot from my local dollar store. It is 5.75 inches in diameter. Just needed to remove that label. I've got this scrap piece of cotton fabric. It's just a natural piece and I love it. It's lighter weight and it's really great to use in different projects. So as you can see, I am using a pencil and I just put a mark on it just so I know how to roll the pot over my fabric. You can see I'm just roughly tracing out the bottom and the top so I know how much fabric I need to cut out. Reality is I only actually need to cut the bottom just so that it shapes around the pot nicely. So I'm just roughly rolling it, and then I am just tracing out the bottom as I go along, and I'm ending where that pencil mark is made on the pot. Now I'm just going to cut out that bottom portion of the fabric and putting my pot in place, and I'm going to just make sure that it does fit, and it surprisingly does because I was just roughly doing this. I'm going to trim off any of the excess on the edges as you see me doing here, just so I've got a nice fit around my pot. Just be careful that you don't cut off too much. If you do cut off too much, it's not going to fit all the way around. So this is a scrap piece that I'm using, hence the reason why it's kind of just being roughly done, but I'm sure you get the gist of what I'm trying to achieve here. So again, just trimming off a little bit of the excess so that it will wrap around my pot. You can see the nice shape that I've created there. And surprisingly, like I said, it fits really well. Before I move on, I am going to spray the pot with some Whisper Antique spray paint as well as some clear gloss on the inside. I needed to seal this pot up. To decorate the fabric, I am going to be using some Deco Art patio paint. It is an outdoor paint, so it will hold up really, really well. But before I continue on, I'm going to just do a test here of some leaf stamping. So I've got paintbrushes, a brayer, and a selection of the paints that I want to use. And I'm going to paint on these leaves that I collected from my yard. I've got this beautiful fern leaf. I'm just going to put some paint on the leaf, as you see me doing right here, and then I'm going to place this onto a scrap piece of fabric. I'm going to use my brayer to roll it out. The brayer did get a little dirty, so it smudged a little bit, but you can see the pattern that's left behind. I'm going to test out a few of my other leaves just so I know what I'm doing, because this is the first time I have ever done this. I'm using my finger this time to smooth it out and try to get a stamped image. This one didn't turn out quite as well, as you can see, but I am okay with that. This is going to be a very organic project. I'm not going for perfect. There's going to be lots of imperfections, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to just go ahead and I found the brayer actually worked the best. You do want to clean off your brayer in between. I'm going to add a little bit more stamping here if I find that the image did not transfer very well. And I'm going to go ahead and just use multiple colors. I had a bit of black and white here as well. I tried to mix that in with some of the greens just to create a little bit of some just interest to the paint colors. So I'm just going to go ahead and stamp away, and then I will show you what I came up with. So I've got my fabric all covered, but I felt like there was still a few spots that could use a little bit more stamping. So I just added a little bit of the fern image just here and there. And I felt like it looked a little bit more complete because there was a few spots all along the edge that were blank. My pot is all nice and dry. Now it's nice and waterproof. I'm going to be using that Mod Podge mixture that I had already made for my previous project. And I'm going to start to apply this in sections. So I'm just going to lay my fabric out, and then I'm going to put some of the decoupage glue mixture onto the pot, just like you see me doing here. I'm using a large brush, and it does actually surprisingly take quite a bit of the decoupage glue. So like I said, I'm just going to work in sections. I'm making sure I'm pressing it underneath the lip of the pot as well. Flipping it over, and I'm going to continue to add the glue. I am just going to be doing the undercoat to start, and then once I've got it all in place, then I will go over top of the entire piece with my mixture. So I have the fabric almost completely attached here, but you can see I've got a little bit of an overlap here. So I'm just going to trim off any of the fabric that didn't have any of the stamping on it. And then I'm going to go ahead and flip the other part of the fabric over, trim off anything that I felt was just too much. And then I'm going to finish off by applying more of the decoupage glue and pressing the fabric to seal off that edge. I did go over that edge with quite a bit of the decoupage because I really wanted to make sure that was going to stay sealed down. So now I'm going to go ahead and start to apply my glue over top of the entire pot, and I'm going to take my finger and just run it over the underside, the edge of the pot, just to make sure it's all nice and sealed down and any bubbles are removed. I've allowed that to dry, and now I'm going to go ahead and apply some on the top portion of the pot, and I'm going to seal all that down as well. Just folding all those extra edges inside of the pot. So I'm going to flip the pot over, and I'm going to do the same thing with the underside. You could just trim this part off. I'm not sure how well it's going to hold up when water touches this and reacts to this. So I actually am going to be spray painting the entire thing just to make sure it stays good. But I'm only going to be placing a pot inside of this pot. I'm not actually going to be putting a plant directly in there. I gave the whole thing a coat of some matte varnish here. That way here it'll be nice and protected. You can go ahead and use some of that UV spray from Krylon as well. That will help to protect the fabric from any fading that may occur. I love how this pot turned out, and I really love the organic look of it. I I needed to make some new pillows for our sun deck furniture. It's seen better days, but I'm not ready to replace it. I'm going to be using this drop cloth. It's a remnant that I had left over from a previous project. I'm just going to take the measurements that I had and just cut out some pieces from this drop cloth, and then I'm going to start to piece everything together. So I'm just going to be straightforward with you here. I am not very good with the sewing machine, so I am not going to be digging that thing out. I don't know what is going on with my machine, but it has not been working very well for me. So I am going to be using some fabric glue. This is Gorilla fabric glue, and it is brand new on the market. I've never tried it before, and I haven't seen it before, and I was excited to try it out because I love the Gorilla products. So once I had all my pieces cut out, I went and trimmed them down a little bit more, and I should not have done that because then I ended up cutting them down too much. But like I said, I am not a sewer, so I'm not very good when it comes to all of this, but I'm gonna just make do with what I have. Anyway, so I did cut things down a bit. You can see how wrinkled they are. So I decided that, I'm going to iron them. So I did just put my iron on high heat, misted it with some water, and ironed out all of those wrinkles. And it looks so much better, and it'll make it easier for me to work with because then I can line things up better. So I just trimmed off any of the edges as needed, just to again help me line things up a little bit better. And now I am going to use my fabric glue that I got. So I did pick it up from Walmart, and I folded up the edge because then I can work with it a little bit easier. Now, please follow the instructions on the fabric glue that you are going to be using. I didn't fully read them. I am so bad for doing that. I just went for it, and it did say that you should apply some to both sides of the fabric and then allow it to set up a little bit. So I did find it was a little bit tricky to apply it. I feel like that they could perhaps use a better applicator to help us squeeze it out and just to create a bit more of an even layer. But I still was quite impressed with how well it is performing. So I just went ahead and applied that, and then I'm going to let it set up according to the instructions. And I am really excited to see how well this stuff holds out for the long term. I am going to keep you updated at the end of the season in my community tab to let you know how well these cushions hold up. So I found as I was working away, I found that the brayer was really good at just smoothing it all out and giving a really good adhesion. You don't have to do that. That was just personal preference as I was going along. So I needed to finish off this one edge, but I needed to leave enough of a hole available so once the glue has set, I can flip my cushion inside out. So keep that in mind when you are creating yours, just to make leave enough of a hole that you can access your hand in there and flip the cushion inside out. It's the next day, and you can see it's actually holding together quite well. I was pulling on it quite hard. I'm trimming off the corners just so I can get a nice pointy edge on each one when I flip it around. So now I'm going to turn this inside out. I did get a few wrinkles in it again when I did this, but once I have it stuffed, those wrinkles aren't going to be showing. They weren't as bad as they were before. I did struggle a little bit getting this out because this fabric is quite thick. You could use any fabric. I just, again, had this drop cloth in my stash, and it's a really good fabric to use for different projects. So I thought I would just utilize that instead of letting it go to waste. So I'm just going to poke out those corners as best as I can. I did end up taking my scissors and just kind of poking them out just a little bit more, and that worked quite well. So now I can start to stuff my pillow. So you could use some pillow forms. I could not find any, so I decided to get this fiberfill that I picked up from Walmart. So as I had mentioned earlier, I did trim this down, the fabric down too much. I didn't take into account that I was going to be stuffing this and it would end up not fitting the backs of my chairs the way I had hoped for. But it's okay, it still turned out great. I'm using some Gorilla Glue sticks to seal up the opening of my pillows. I'm just working in sections. Again, Gorilla makes really good adhesive products, so I thought I'm gonna try the hot glue and again, see how well that holds up outside in the heat of the summer throughout the season, and I will keep you updated on that. If you know how to hand stitch and close this up, then by all means do it that way, but as mentioned, I'm not very good at that, so I'm using hot glue. So once you have it all sealed up, you can take these outside and spray them with some heavy duty Scotch Guard that will keep them safe from the elements. And that's it. I think they actually turned out really good. Despite the error of mismeasuring, I still love them and they are comfortable. I have this little jam jar left from canning and I had distressed and rusted this canning lid. I've got a video on how to do that for you listed down in the description box below. I had coffee dyed this scrap piece of some eyelet lace. I really love eyelet lace. It's so pretty. I'm using this tape roll and just tracing around it with a pencil. It's a little bit bigger than my canning lid. I'm going to use my scissors and just cut that out. I wish I actually would have used some pinking shears for this. I think that would have been a really nice added touch to the edge, but I didn't think of this until after the fact. I'm going to set that other scrap aside. So you can see that this fabric fits over my jar really nicely, and I'm just going to make sure it fits underneath my lid well, and I like how that looks. You can just pull it tight as needed and just making sure it's all fitting together, and it does. So this is something I've never seen here in Canada in the area where I live. I picked it up from the craft mall that we had visited. I had to seal it up really well because it's heavily scented and there is also an oil. So what it is this beautiful potpourri. And like I said, I hadn't seen anything specifically like this. So it does come with an oil refresher, but it has some really pretty wax scent pieces in it. And it looks like some like fruit, like little berries and little apple slices. And I had never seen anything like this before. So I really liked that. I thought it would be fun for the Christmas season. So I thought, this has got to come home with me. So I was excited to bring that. So, and it fit in my suitcase really well. I'm filling up my jar with the little pieces, and there was a nice little window in the front of the jar, so I wanted to make sure that little piece of apple was showing there and some of the berries, and there was other things like some rose hips in there. So I just filled up this little jar with that, and now I am going to take my little piece of fabric, place it on the top of the jar and close it up with the canning lid ring. And you can see how it all has a really fun, beautiful, primitive country look to it. And the potpourri totally reminds me of one of those old-fashioned country farmhouse homes. The smell and aroma of pumpkin pie baking, I just thought it was just such a fun little easy to do project. I'm going to decorate it using some baker's twine. I'm just going to wrap it around the lid, and then I am going to just tie a simple basic bow using the baker's twine. And one thing I like to do with my baker's twine is to tie off a knot on each end. It'll help to prevent this from fraying any further. So I just basic little knot on the end, and then you can cut off any of the excess as needed. Now I'm going to add some greenery again, this flock greenery that I had. I've got a big bundle of it. It was pretty inexpensive. I picked it up on clearance. One thing I like to do is to pick up some different greenery throughout the year that I can use any time of the year. It doesn't have to be specifically Christmas or spring. So you can see how that's looking so far. I'm going to add a little bit more, and I'm also going to be adding some pip berries and some really cute little bells that I had aged using my rust technique. You can see how rusted those are. These had been done several years ago, so they aged beautifully. One thing I will say, if you don't want them to continue aging, then you'll definitely have to spray them with a matte sealer. So I'll just glue the bells and the berries into place, and then you can put it on display anywhere in your home for the Christmas season. I will just let you know that I do have a project planned on how to use that scented oil that I had purchased to go with this potpourri as well. So definitely stay tuned for that upcoming video as well. Hey, I'm curious, what type of primitive projects have you made for your holiday season? Let me know down below. I have an assortment of some different green fabrics here. You can see I've got all kinds of different patterns. I even have different textures. You're also going to need some green cardstock. This is the Forest Pack from Recollections. I picked this up at Michael's. I'm choosing the two lighter colors, but of course you can use whatever you'd like. I'm using some fabric glue for this project because fabric glue remains nice and pliable. So I'm going to also be using a plastic card. You could use a piece of cardboard to smooth out the glue. I'm going to just start off by just trimming off any of the fabric ends and removing the strings. And then I'm going to start to apply some of the glue to the cardstock. I'm applying it quite generously and then using my card to just smooth it out. This works very well. I do want the glue to go all the way to the edge. You can see here I'm just covering half of the cardstock with my glue because I'm going to use two different types of fabric on here. You could use one sheet or piece of fabric to cover the whole entire sheet. That is up to you. There is no right or wrong when it comes to doing this. So I applied the fabric into the glue and I smoothed it and pressed it down. Now I'm just going to trim off any excess. You can see this is a little bit of a bigger scrap of fabric too. I'm going to go in and just add a little bit more glue as needed. I'm also working on a protected surface. I'm working on a craft mat so I don't get glue all over my craft table. Now I'm going to go in and apply glue on the other side. Same process as before. And this time around though, I am going to be using a different fabric. I like to do this technique because it just opens up a few more options on how you can use your fabric because it just adds a bit more stability to your fabric. So you can see here now, I'm just going to press that into place, smooth it out, and then again, trim off any of the excess fabric. If you're new, I want to say a big welcome. And if you're returning, I want to thank you all so much for your continued support. I truly do appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead now and add some glue to the other side of our cardstock. I didn't worry about allowing it to dry first before I did this step because I am going to let it dry overnight in the next step here, but first I just needed to cover all of that up. Now I'm going to add some weight to the top of this, and again, like I said before, I'm going to allow it to dry overnight. So I'm going to do a second sheet of cardstock, but this time I'm doing a little bit of a different technique. I've got some beautiful scraps of fabric. These are smaller pieces. You can see I'm just trimming off any of the seams that are showing because that'll just give too much bulk to the technique that I am doing. Just going to trim that down, and then this piece, I only had this little scrap left, so I am going to cut that down into 4 little pieces. And then I'm going to go ahead and just gather up some of my other material, little pieces of scrap, just cutting them down. You can see this one's all misshapen, so I was just cutting that into a square shape. Now I'm going to apply some glue in sections. I didn't want to cover the whole thing in glue because I'm creating a little patchwork look, and if I added glue all over, chances are it'll dry out before I get to that section. So I'm just gonna apply little scraps into where the glue was already applied, making sure that I add that pretty little decorative fabric I just added there sporadically throughout so it's nice and even. just just so I can make use of it, because I just love that fabric. It's an old shirt of mine and I just love that pattern. I think it's so fun. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue to fill it all in, and then I'm going to go ahead, flip it over and work on the back side. But I'm just going to go the same way I did before and just add some larger scraps onto the back, just like you see me doing here, just like before. And then I'm going to allow these pieces to dry as well. You could use the same technique and create a book cover. I've done that before. I will have some other fabric scrap DIY videos for you linked down below in the description box for you to check out if you are wanting to bust your stash. So I'm going to allow this to dry. You can see how beautiful it looks. While those are drying, I did let them dry overnight, but I decided I'm going to create something kind of fun here. I had these strips of fabric in this beautiful pattern, and this again is an old shirt of mine. I've used it several times in different projects, creating just single knots in these strips. And what I'm planning on doing is creating like little flower buds out of these knots. So with the cardstock and fabric, I am going to be cutting some leaves out of that, and I'll show you that here in a minute, but I just wanted to show you how you can create the blossoms so you can have those all ready to go once your cardstock and fabric is all dry. So I did a double knot here. I thought, let's try making some bigger buds. I wasn't sure if this was going to work or not. I didn't end up using these larger ones, but if you are doing a bigger piece, that's how you can create some larger buds. So it's the next day and my fabric and paper or cardstock is all dry. So I'm gonna just trim up the edges. I don't want all that excess there. You can save those scraps if you'd like. I'm giving myself permission to throw those away. I'm now gonna just do some simple leaf shapes using my scissors. You can also use a die set, and I will be showing you that in a minute. You could probably also use your Cricut maker if you have one. I don't, so I'm just doing this by hand. You can see I'm just going to trim off any of the little excess bits that I didn't cut leaves out of, because these were, well, just a little bit too small. I did manage to squeeze getting some tiny leaves out of some of the sections, and then I just allowed myself again to throw out any excess. Otherwise, I become a hoarder of all these little bits and pieces. So now I'm going to show you how to do the die set. You will need a precision plate for this, and I should have actually used a newer cutting plate with this as well, because I did struggle with getting it cut out a bit, but I did get the job done. It worked in the end. So I'm just going to cut out a little piece of our fabric and cardstock, put our die in place, and then use the Sizzix Big Shot. Now, I should have also moved my die around on the plate. I find that you end up getting a nice clean cut. Put it through your machine several times, but here's where I discovered that it didn't cut all the way through, and I should have moved this around on my plate. I find that it ends up, I don't know, putting different pressure points on something like this, but the leaves did cut out. I'm just going to use my scissors to cut them the rest of the way out. And then you can, because that's the only portion I needed for this project anyways, was just the leaves. I don't need the stem for this, but you can see the stem or the leaf pattern here looks pretty cool. You could use that in a journal, or you could frame it or do something with that. But I decided to just trim out more leaves out of any of the sections that I was able to salvage. And here they are. Aren't they cute? So I've got my buds and my leaves, and now you're also going to need a branch. Now I'm using a red willow branch here, but you can use anything. Just make sure it's got lots of little forks coming off of the branch. I'm going to just trim it down a little bit and clean up the bottom just so it's easier to put into a vase when I'm done. Now I'm adding just a little bit of hot glue on the leaf, and then I'm going to put it into the joints of each of the stems that are coming off of our branch. You can see me holding it, allowing the glue to set before I let it go. This will take a little while to work on, but just put on a movie or a video on YouTube, and then just work slowly and Take your time. This is a really relaxing craft, and I actually think it turned out amazing. It is a great spring craft. You could also do this with kids. You can make these leaves as big as you want to, and the buds as big as you want to as well. So I'm going to just trim off a little bit of the end as well. It just gave me more space to adhere glue, and it just gave me better adhesion. Another trick too is that I decided, I'm like, let's give a little bit more texture to these leaves. So I decided to try bending them, and because I used the fabric glue, this remained really nice and pliable. So that just gave it a little bit of shape, and I decided to go back in and do that for all my leaves. The hot glue actually is holding together fairly well onto the branch. I don't know how well it will hold up long term because this is the first time I've done this before. If you can suggest another glue that gives a quick hold, please leave that suggestion down in the comment section. Another thing you'll see me doing is that I'm adding the large leaves on the bottom and further in, and then I'm going to go smaller as I move out on the branch. So I've got that all in place now. I'm going to add my buds. Now I was looking and I'm like, I don't know if I want to add the buds, but I'm like, you know what? This is for spring. Spring's got those pretty little flower buds. I'm just going to go for it to add that pop of color that we all love for springtime. So I'm adding a little bit of hot glue on both ends of the knots. That way here, it will prevent it from unraveling. I apologize, I'm out of frame right here, but I will show you here in a second how I do that. Just add just a little bit of hot glue on the one end, and then you're gonna put hot glue on the other end and put it into place, snuggled up into the leaves, just like you see me doing here. Trim off any of the excess fabric. Again, you can save those little bits if you want. And then just tuck that into the leaves, and you can see how pretty that looks. It looks like little flower buds bursting at spring. I think it just turned out so beautiful. So one thing I haven't touched on much is felt scraps. I've got this bag of some neutral colors. I wanted some of the white. I've got this stiffened felt fabric as well. This is from Arteza. It's not a scrap, but you can see I was starting to use it already. You're also going to need some heat bond with some paper backing. You need extra strong, and follow the directions on the brand that you're using. I'm also going to use an iron. I'm using my mini press. You need some parchment paper, your scraps of fabric with a pretty little pattern on it. And you can see I already have my felt cut down to size 2. So I'm going to use this beautiful floral and coral fabric again. It's one of my favorites. And I needed to iron it so I can have a good look at the pattern and choose what I wanted to use out of this fabric. I needed some little pieces here, just nice little squares where I'm focusing on a small pattern in the center. So I had seen this idea on Pinterest where people use their tiny scraps to make fabric stamps, and I absolutely fell in love with the idea. So I decided to try and create my own. I'm just going to go through all these different types of fabrics. I've got several types here. This is like a really soft fabric here. I don't know the names of my fabrics, sorry. So if you know the name of this one, please leave me a message down below. All right, so I'm just going to again just go through all of these and just cut out some of the patterns. This is an old tank top of mine, and it has a beautiful pattern and some sequins, so I'm just going to cut some of that out. And then I'm also going to be using this Cricut press mat as well for this. It's nice and small. I'm going to just trim this down, and I couldn't get a nice clean edge, so I decided to use a rotary blade and a steel ruler on a flat surface. My rotary cutter here was not working very well, I think because I have a handle on it, and I kept on like not pressing the handle properly. So I ended up switching out to my Dollar Tree rotary cutter later on, but I just finished this job using that one. So now I'm going to just cut down the strips that I need. So I'm just using what I have. So you might have some that's a large sheet or some thicker strips. Use whatever you have or go and buy some. This was a little bit tedious using these thin strips, but I didn't want to run to the store to get some new stuff. I just wanted to use what I had. So I got that all into place, pressed it down with parchment paper, and then I did the same with all my other little scraps here. Turned out that 3 strips was just enough for each of the little pieces of fabric that I cut out. So you do want to allow these all to cool before removing the paper backing. And I have to say, removing the paper backing was so satisfying. I don't know why, but I love doing that. Just be careful. I did find that sometimes it wanted to rip off. So there you have it. We're all ready to go. Now we're going to apply them to our felt fabrics. So I'm going to experiment on both. The one that is stiffened, pre-stiffened, and then the regular craft felt. So I'm going, the ones with the green is on the Arteza stiffened fabric. And then the pinks are on the regular craft felt. So I put those into place. I'm gonna, again, iron it using my Cricut mini press. And you're gonna wanna let those cool down before you cut them out. So they're all cooled down now. I'm going to use my pinking shears to cut them out. Now these are really old pinking shears. I got them from my mom and they're not sharp anymore. I did use some tinfoil to help sharpen them up a little bit, but they aren't the best. I do need to get them professionally done. But you can see using the pinking shears gives that stamp look. And this is the stiffened felt, and that cut out really well. I did struggle a little bit more with the soft stuff. Again, that's probably because my pinking shears need to be sharpened, but it worked out pretty good as well. I'm thinking I would actually like it better if the felt was backed onto a piece of cardstock, but you can see how cute these are, and they were so easy and fun to make. So you can use these for anything, different projects, but this is going to be a 3-part DIY for something that I want to try and create. So this is the next project. This is going to just be using some of our medium-sized scraps here. And I needed to cut this down. It was too big for the project that I wanted to make. So I'm just gonna use my steel ruler, and I'm also going to be using my Dollar Tree rotary cutter, but first I wanted to cut it down just using my scissors. I don't have measurements. I just eyeballed all of this. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the same. Now what I'm doing is creating a little pouch or like a little envelope. So I just need to cut off any of the excess, and then you can see a cute little pouch I formed. I'm just going really simple. There are other ways to create it, but I just wanted to go with something very easy and simple. Just going to line up my ruler and the edge of the fabric to the edge of my cutting board, and then I'm going to use my rotary tool just to even out those edges as well as the top and the bottom. So again, this was another idea that I had seen on Pinterest. I saw tons of fabric envelopes. So just go on there and have a look to see all the different styles that they have. I needed to iron this out, so I'm using some water and again my mini press and my Cricut heat pad here. I'm gonna just add some water. Oh, already did that. I'm gonna add some water again and iron out the back side here. So now I'm going to fold up to create my little pocket, and then I'm going to fold down the flap, and then I want to iron it into place because I needed to make sure that those lines were going to stay in place. So I did that here, and then I'm going to fold down the flap and press the top as well. So you can use this for lots of different things. You could add a little card inside or what have you, but I thought it would be really fun to combine it with the little fabric stamps that we made, as well as one other project that I'm going to show you. Here you'll see me just rounding off the corner here. I thought it just created a bit more of a realistic look. I think it just finished it off really nicely. And then I'm going to just press that down again. So I'm going to use my heat bond again, the extra strength. I will show you here in a minute. It wasn't quite enough. I should have maybe put 2 strips. I'm not exactly sure, but I end up doing another technique anyways to help hold everything into place. So again, same thing. I'm just going to cut my strips down to size, put them into place, being very careful to remain on the fabric because, oops, I made a mistake and oh dear, some of the glue ended up getting on my heat pad and I had to try and remove it. And I struggled a little bit, but eventually I was able to scrape it off. And I'll show you that here in a second. So again, once those strips are in place, I'm going to use my parchment paper and then I'm going to use my mini press to press that down. Of course, you could just use a regular iron, but here I'm just scraping off the glue. I went off just ever so slightly. It'll happen, but anyway, so once it's cooled, you can remove the backing and then press it down to create the pocket. I folded the flap down again and I'm pressing it again just to secure that that fold line there. So I discovered that the heat bond didn't work quite as well as I had hoped, so I decided to add some stitching. And you could use a sewing machine if you want, but I'm just using a needle and some embroidery floss. And I'm just going to do a simple running stitch all the way around our pocket, as well as the top of the flap. This creates a really nice decorative look. I really like the way it just adds just a bit more interest. Of course, you could use a pattern fabric or even felt would work really well for this envelope as well, but I'm just using some thicker natural canvas fabric and you can see how nice that looks. I went all the way around and then I'm just going to use a simple knot, and to secure that simple knot I am going to be adding just a little bit of some fabric glue, which I will show in a moment. This is the Craft Medley brand. I get it from my local dollar store. So I'm going to allow that to dry and you're ready to use this for anything. Like I said, you could add a little card inside. So I was looking at it, I'm like, it feels like it just needs one more little detail. So I decided to go around and just trim it off a little bit with the pinking shears. And I really like the way that looked, but you do not have to do this step. It looks great on its own the way it is, but I just like that added texture. Isn't this just a fun little pocket? So again, I'm going to show you what it looks like here just on its own, so you can use it any way you'd like, but this is the second part to a 3-part project. You're going to want to grab that second piece of cardstock and fabric that we glued together. I'm cutting out just a basic heart shape here. You can cut out any shape that you'd like. I thought since it's Valentine's Day coming up, this would be fun to do. And I just hand did it. You could use your Cricut machine, Cricut Maker, or a die cutting set. I've got this little love quote and some extra fabric. I'm also using some fern green archival ink. It's a permanent ink and a makeup sponge. And I'm just adding a little bit to the exterior, the edge of this little paper piece. I just like the way that looks. And you don't have to, of course, do that if you don't want. I'm going to glue that little paper piece onto this scrap piece of fabric. So I'm going to glue it down first so then I can cut it out nicely. Again, using my fabric glue. Smooth it out, and then I'm going to press it into the fabric. I find that the fabric glue works really well with the cardstock and fabric. So I put something flat on top, added some weight, allowed it to dry, and now I'm going to cut it out. Just using my scissors, just going around, and then I'm going to just rough up the edges a little bit. just by removing some of the threads, and that would just help just give it a bit more of a rustic organic look. So I'm just using my fingernails, just roughing it up. Now I'm going to just place it in the middle of our heart. It looks really cute. Again, using my fabric glue. So again, I'm going to put something flat on top, allow it to dry well before you put it into your little pocket. It's all ready to go. Isn't this so pretty? You could use this for anything. You can even use it in a journal, or you could use it to decorate the front of a card. I thought that would be pretty as well. So now we're going to put the 3 pieces together. I'm going to tuck my sweet little heart inside of the envelope, and then I'll show you what each of the stamps look like. Now, I would hot glue the stamp onto the flap, the top of the flap, and then I would see what I have for a low tack glue for the bottom portion to seal it, or you could even use just a little piece of Velcro to attach that to the main pocket as well as the stamp. But here it looks all together. I think this is such a sweet little gift, perfect for any time of year. And it's a really great way to use up all kinds of different scraps. So this one is going to be using a larger piece of scrap fabric. I got this from a friend. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And I wanted to create something for my mom. She moved into a new place and she's creating an art gallery wall. So I thought it would be fun to make her a piece of art for her wall. And this is such an easy way to do it. I needed to iron out all the wrinkles. I don't want any wrinkles to be showing on this piece. So I just sprayed some water and I'm using my regular iron, and I am using my heat press mat, but of course I'd normally do it on an ironing board. You're going to need an artist canvas here. This is a gallery style, so it's the thicker canvas. It's a 12 by 14. I get these from a local shop, but of course you can get these anywhere on Amazon or at Michael's, wherever you find canvases. So I'm going to lay the fabric over my canvas, and I'm trying to make it so that the pattern is more in the center, but the edges are going to wrap around the canvas to the back. So I've got enough there for me to staple the fabric onto this canvas. So I'm taking my time to make sure that those flowers are towards the middle of this canvas as much as possible. So I'm just kind of fiddling around here quite a bit, pulling on it just gently to make sure that I've got enough room on the back, as you see me here, to staple it into place. So once you're happy with that, you're going to flip it over carefully so nothing falls out of place. And then you're going to start to tack it into place with your staple gun. So I attempted to staple it here, but I'm like, oh shoot, my staple gun is out of staples. So I loaded it up. I used the 8mm size, and it was it's not like the really deep ones, so that's the size that you want. I'm going to start to staple it in the middle on each side. You just want to be careful that you don't pull it too tight, but you want it taut. If you pull it too tight, you're going to distort the image, so you do want to be careful. I'm just going to start off again, like I said, with one staple on each side before I move on. I'm going to trim off any excess as needed right here. Again, just using my scissors. And of course, I'm going to be saving that scrap for another project. So I'm just going to make sure it looks good before I continue on, because at this point you could just remove the staple and fix any mistake that you've made. Looks good, so now I'm going to continue on. I'm going to again just pull taut, not too tight, and I'm going to continue to add some staples all the way around the edge. And then I'm going to show you how I do the corners as well. So with the corners, I'm going to cut off the tip there, and then you want to fold down the one side and staple it down. You're going to lift the corner, and the one edge, you want it to meet up with the edge of your canvas, just like there, and then staple it down. Lift up the other part and same thing, you want that edge to line up with the edge of the canvas and staple it down. You can see how nice and clean that is. It takes a little bit of fiddling around to get it figured out, but once you get it figured out, you'll know exactly what to do. So again, fold that one piece down and staple it into place. Lift the corner up so it's nice and even there, and then fold down the other side so it's even with the edge as well. So I'm going to staple this into place, fold up the other edge, staple it down, fold up the other edge so it's even to the canvas, and then again, staple it down. Just want to make sure you don't have too much bulk, otherwise it will be really difficult to staple through all that excess fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and just clean up any of the excess around the inner edge as well and finish up all my corners, and then I will show you how it turned out. I was actually so happy. This is one of the easiest ways to create art. I've done this before and it is so effective. This one turned absolutely beautiful. I've already showed my mom and she loves it. So I'm going to start off with this pretty simple pink as well as this Christmas patterned fabric that I got from the thrift store. I'm wanting to cut some circles out of the fabrics, so I'm using this die set that I have. I'm going to be using my Sizzix die cutting machine. So you could use your scissors and just trace around something to create a circle, or you could use your cutting machine such as a Silhouette or a Cricut, either one. But I have this Sizzix machine and I haven't used it for a while, so I wanted to dig it out, and I knew I had these circle die cutting sets, so I wanted to use those. I should have used a precision plate. This particular one, the Christmas pattern, it cut really easily, but I did find that the thinner pink one, it didn't cut all the way through as well, but once I tried it with the precision plate, it cut really well. So I've got my circles cut out, and now I'm going to cut 2 strands of string. I'm just using some crochet thread. I'm going to fold my circles in half, and then I'm going to just press that seam down, and now I'm going to fold it into a quarter. And again, I'm going to press that down. I wanted to create a bit of a crease there in the center. And now I'm going to leave it folded in half, but I'm going to gather it on that little fold line that I had down the center. Now I'm going to be using my string, and I'm going to wrap it around a couple of times, and then I'll tie it off with a simple knot. And I want to make sure that it's quite tight, but not so tight that I can't move the fabric around if needed, if things are a little bit off center. Now, I was inspired by several different projects that I had seen on Pinterest. I'm going to do my best to have that link down below. I just wanted to give credit where credit was due, just to let you know that I did get these ideas off of other creators on Pinterest, especially this particular project. It is so cute. So I've got my strings tied off, and then I'm just straightening it out. I want to make sure that things are center, and you can see it looks kind of like wings. And now I'm going to do the same thing with this larger circle that's got the patterned fabric. So you can see how these are. I wanted to glue the 2 rounded bottoms together. So here they are. You can see how it's rounded on one side, and then they kind of wing up on the other side. So I want to put those 2 rounded bottoms together, and I'm going to add just a little hot glue. And then I'm going to join those 2 pieces together, just like you see me doing here. Now you can do this all using pipe cleaners or string or wire, whatever you have, but I want to do a combo of some hot glue and some string. Next, I am going to be creating my hanger. Now, I should have actually waited to do my hanger here. I glued it to the back side, but I should have actually glued it to what I consider to be the front side. And you'll see why here in a moment. But if you're not going to do all the steps that I will be doing, then you can just leave this as is. It looks really cute. You can tell it's a butterfly. I thought it would be a fun little Christmas ornament to have for the tree. And you can create these in all different types of colors as well as different fabrics. But I think this is really cute just as is, but I decided I wanted to add a little touch of nature. So I have this red willow branch. Now, what ended up happening was that it added some extra weight and it ended up hanging funny. So I will show you my fix, but first of all, I'm just going to trim this down to size. I wanted to use that fork in the branch as my antennas. I thought it would work naturally, and I really like the red willow with this fabric combination. So once I'm happy with how that looks, I'm just going to add hot glue in the center, and then I'm going to press my branch into place. I'm just going to hold that and let it set for a little bit. Didn't take very long to set. And this is where I did a test to see how it was going to hang, and see the weight of it had it flip forward, and I didn't want that. So I'm just going to add a little bit more hot glue to the back of the branch, and then I'm going to push my strings into that glue, and then it was able to hang properly. But what I should have done was sandwiched my hanging string between the branch and the butterfly, so it was in the middle. But like I said, I found a fix and it worked well for me, but just wanted to let you guys know that just in case you decide to make these with the branch. But I love how it turned out. I think it's such a fun and simple project. I created this dress form pattern or template on Canva. So I'm going to again have that link down below for you. I also have one where there's just the outline of the body or the dress form. I'm cutting them out. I'm going to be using this particular one because you can see that it has a top portion, and that's going to fold over to create the back side of my dress that I'm creating. So you can see how it works right here. And then I needed to cut out that white triangle that you see there on the top. So I did keep it folded, and I'm going to cut through that and then cut out that triangle. You could use, again, your cutting machine if you have one, but I thought not everybody has those machines, so I thought I would try to print it out using my printer and then use my scissors to cut these templates out. So you can get some dress form patterns online as well, just simple templates, so you can do a search. I am going to be using some stiff, sturdy felt that I had in this just this neutral color. You could use any color that you want. I'm going to use a pencil to trace around it, and then I'm going to use my scissors to cut it out. Once you have it cut out, you can cut out that star portion again by folding it and then cutting into it, and then you can just cut out the excess. I was thinking you could probably use a ruler and a craft knife as well if you wanted to make it a little bit easier. I'm just trimming it down just a little bit because I cut it a little bit unevenly, but you can see how it folds over, and then you've got a dress form with some sleeves. And those sleeves are going to be important for us. I'm going to glue that back tab to the back side of our dress form, and now we are going to start to create the rest of it. This is just the base of it. I'm using this beautiful eyelet lace scrap that I had in my stash. Right here, I'm just measuring how much I need to create the skirt portion of our dress. So I'm just going to use my scissors and cut it down. Now, I am creating raw edges, so I just like to cut into it, and then I like to tear it and then remove any of the excess little strings. But I like that look. You don't have to do that if you don't like that look. I just thought it would be kind of like a casual, relaxed look for the edge. I'm just cutting this excess here just to straighten out the top edge. the top edge where I tore it, that's actually going to be the bottom edge of my dress that I'm making. I'm just making sure that it's the right length, height. And now I'm just checking to see how much I need to gather and where I need to trim it down so I have a nice full skirt. And I just cut off that one edge because it wasn't straight. And now I've got my string all ready to go, but I wanted to create like a full tube here. So I'm putting my two edges together, and I made sure that the right side of fabric was facing up. Then I folded over. So now this is the wrong side of the fabric that's showing. That will be the inside. So I glued the two edges together. Now I'm going to fold it right side out, and there you can see my seam. I'm using my crochet thread, and I'm just going to be stitching along the edge a basic running stitch. I'm going all the way around the top edge, and I'm going to be pulling it tight when I get near the end. When you get to the end, you want to make sure you start and finish stitching on the same side, because we want to be able to tie those two ends together. So you can see I'm just pulling it to gather it just a little bit. Now at this point, you don't want to pull it too tight and you don't want to tie it off. I'm just going to set that aside, and now I am going to just take some strips, because I tested it out and my skirt wasn't quite full enough underneath. You could see my dress template form underneath. So I'm just cutting some strips, and I'm going to glue these pieces onto the form just on the skirt portion. Now I'm using the same fabric that I used for my skirt, but I had seen some use tulle, or I had seen others use lace, or even some ribbon trim. You can use whatever you want. You just want to make sure you have it nice and full to create a nice full skirt look. So I'm just adding 3 strips folded in half, and I'm just kind of gathering them so you can see how it just makes it a little bit more full. And I'm going to do the same thing on the back side. Now you can see that the pieces are nice and long. I wasn't sure how short I needed to make them. I also wanted them to be kind of lopsided too. I find that if they're like different lengths, it creates a bit more of a full look. Before I add my skirt though, I wanted to cover up the shoulder part of this dress. So I'm going to use just some crochet lace that I had on hand, and I'm going to use my hot glue and cover those pieces up. Now you can make these dresses as simple and as fancy as you'd like. It really depends on the trims and lace and fabrics that you use. I was somewhat inspired by like Little House on the Prairie, where they have nice, pretty, simple dresses, and even like their Sunday dresses were so pretty and tasteful, but yet they were really, really simple, and I just love that look. So this kind of inspired me to create this dress. Again, just really simple, and I like the neutral look as well. And you could, like I said, totally dress this up any way you'd like. So once you've got those bases all in place, now you can slip your little skirt over top of your dress form. So you can see I pulled it down to the waist, and all those little extra pieces are tucked underneath. I'm going to pull this tight. You don't want to pull it too tight to cinch in the waist too much, just enough so it stays in place. I'm going to tie a simple knot, and then I'm going to trim down the extra string pieces. You could add a touch of glue underneath to help hold the skirt into place if you'd like. I found that I actually didn't need to do that. If I was selling one of these though, I definitely would make sure everything is glued in place. Now I can trim down all those extra little pieces underneath. I just wanted to do that, but you could definitely leave them all dangling down. That would create a very artistic look. But again, like I said, I wanted to create a bit more of a Little House on the Prairie look, so I wanted to clean that up underneath. I'm going to trim down another little piece of my eyelet lace. I'm cutting a strip here where the flowers are in the center, and I'm going to be creating a band that's going to wrap around the middle. I'm doing that because I wanted to cover up all the stitching that is on the top of our skirt, as well as hide the bottom portion of that crochet lace where the arm sleeves are. So I'm just going to use my hot glue, and I'm going to fold the edge to create a hem, and I'm going to do that along both edges to create a nice clean strip of fabric. So now I'm just going to measure to make sure I have enough of a piece here. I'm adding some glue at the top, and I'm going to press that fabric band into place. I've decided to make sure that there was a little flower that was centered at the front. I thought it would be a pretty little decorative touch. I'm going to wrap it around, I'm going to glue the one end down, and I'm going to glue the other end down as well, but I ended up having to trim it a little bit because it was a tiny bit too long. If you didn't want to create your own waistband, you could definitely add some ribbon trim of some type. I actually think some velvet ribbon would be really, really pretty and elegant touch. So I'm just going to finish this up here, just cleaning up that middle edge that hides all the mechanics of the little skirt that we created. I wanted to finish off the back, so I decided to add a button that hides all the work of the seam around the waistband that we had made. So that's on the back side. You can see how cute this is. I can't wait to make some more. I think it's just a beautiful, fun project. So now I wanted to create my hanger. I decided I'm going to use a branch. So I'm just going to cut this branch down to size. You could definitely buy mini hangers, or I have seen people even use paper clips to create a hanger, but I decided I'm going to use a branch because, again, this is like a country inspired little project here, and I thought the branch would be so fitting for that. And plus, I always like to add a touch of nature to my projects, so I trimmed that down, and now I'm going to be using some galvanized wire to create the hanger portion. So I'm just going to cut a strip of this wire down. If I can remember the gauge of this, I will have it written down. I'm trying to decide how I should do this. So I decided to remove the branch because I wanted the hanger to be in the middle of the branch, just like a real hanger would be. So I'm taking one end, and I've got a long tail. I'll need two long tails, one longer than the other. I wrapped it around the middle a few times, and now I'm using some needle nose pliers, and I'm going to twist those two pieces or those two tails of wire together. That will create a nice thick little hook. Now, I could have used a thicker gauge wire, but then I was concerned that I wouldn't be able to wrap it around the branch really tight, but you could always add just a tiny bit of glue in the center there to help hold the wire in place if you need to. So I twisted the wires together and I created my little hook, and that's what you're going to use to hang it on the tree. I thought it would be a really pretty touch. You could always just glue a little ribbon if you'd like. Just depends on the look that you're going for. I think this is such a cute little hanger, and it does slip through the armholes nicely. And I'm just going to use a little bit of hot glue by just bending the branch down a little bit, and then just sneaking my little nozzle in there, and I'm going to add just a touch of hot glue to help hold the hanger into place on both sides. I felt like it just needed a little something more, so I decided to add a little button on the hanger, and I think that just finished it off nicely. You can add any embellishments that you like. I absolutely love this little dress. I seriously cannot wait to make more. I think they would make a great little thing to sell as well as gift, and would make a great memory keeper. I had these long strips of fabric pieces in my stash, and some of these I have had in my stash for a long time. I also had this keychain, and I thought it would be really fun to do something by combining the two of these. So I've got most of these strips roughly the same width, but some of them I just cut and just ripped and then removed any of this loose threads That way here they were somewhat consistent in width. So I'm just going through my pile, cutting some down to length, and then I am mixing up different textures, different patterns and colors. Now, you'll notice that a lot of these projects have got similar color palettes. And the reason is just because that's what I have a lot of in my fabric stash. So if you're noticing a lot of consistencies with colors throughout these, now you know why. I am just really wanting to just try and get through this so then I can start diving into some other ones. So once you have a nice stack, you're gonna put the bundle through your loop of your keychain and fold it in half so it's wrapped around that little keychain loop. And then you can see how pretty that looks. I really, really like it. I'm going to be using some embroidery thread, and I'm going to cut a nice long strip. I'm going to leave a nice long tail, and then I'm going to start to wrap the other end around the top. That will help to bind all those pieces together. I'm going to pull this quite tight and tie a knot. Just don't pull it so hard that you accidentally break your twine or your string. And you can see how pretty that is. I'm just going to snip off the ends just to help provide a little bit more consistency. I also like to cut my strips on an angle. And of course, you can leave those little bits that you've got left over for another project at a later date. I'm adding a little button, that's this wood button that's got some flowers on it, just hot gluing that into place. And it was that easy. And it is a great way to use up some scraps. This next project I've been wanting to try for a while. I had 2 pieces of just this muslin, just basic cotton fabric, and it's about 2.5 inches wide. Both strands are about that width. And if they were a different size, like in width anywhere, I just trimmed that off. So I needed these pieces to be nice and flat. So I am ironing them out, and I'm just using my mini press and my my heat press pad. So you can see here this end wasn't really nice and even, so I'm just trimming that excess off. I did go ahead and press both of my strips of fabric, and then I'm going to glue 2 ends together. For this part, I am just going to use some hot glue. I'm just trying to keep my bead of glue nice and thin just so that there's not too much bulk. So now you're going to need a branch, or you can use a dowel. I've seen this done on clothespins or even a spool, anything that you'd like. I really wanted to use a branch, but I wanted to make sure that it was the right width. And I'm just wrapping the fabric around my branch just to make sure it doesn't look too awkward. And it did look a little awkward to me. So I'm just going to trim off the end just a little bit. And then I'm just going to check again to see how it's looking to me. And I have to say, I think that looks a whole lot better. It really depends on how wide your fabric strip is. So now back into our stash, you can see I have a pile of tiny little pieces and just some awkward shaped pieces. This project is perfect to use up all those tiny little scraps. So I'm just going to go through my stash, tear some down to size. You can just leave them as is if you'd like. But I wanted my pieces to be a bit more manageable because I'm making a patchy look. What I'm actually creating is what's called a snippet roll. Snippet rolls are a great way to use up all these little odds and ends that we have in our craft stash. You can even make these out of paper, which is a really fun thing. I haven't done that yet, but I think they look absolutely beautiful. So all I'm going to do now is take some fabric glue and start to layer my scrap pieces onto my fabric strip that I have. So I'm just adding some little dabs here and there. Use your favorite fabric glue for this project. I'm just using some that I picked up from a dollar store, and I found that it actually adhered quite well to the fabric. You can see here, even these tiny little scraps that I had, I was able to utilize those as well. So once you have your strip all covered with different fabric bits, you can set it aside and allow it to dry really well. Once dry, you can trim off any of the bits that you don't like. I didn't like this one end very much, so I decided to get rid of it. And then I'm going to just go ahead and take some glue and just tack down any spots that were lifting because I didn't get enough glue in some spots. Now I'm going to attach my strip of fabric onto my branch. I decided to glue mine on. You don't have to, but I do want to keep mine as a decorative piece, but sometimes people use these to decorate tags or cards or journals. They'll just cut a strip off and apply it to whatever project they're working on, but I wanted to keep mine whole. I thought it would be a pretty thing to have. I also dove into my scrap of lace and trims. Again, this is another great project to use up some of these bits. And I'm going to start to lay them out, and I'm going to just go with whatever is pleasing to my eye. There's no right or wrong to a project like this. This is just something fun and creative. I'm just going to, again, use my favorite fabric glue and just start to adhere all these trims and laces. So just to let you know, I do have some other fabric scrap DIY videos for you to check out. I'm going to have a playlist for you posted at the end of the video, as well as in the description box below, if you have a ton of fabric scraps like I do to get rid of. I have created a lot of different unique projects for you to try out, and let me know what you think. So I'm not going to embellish it any further past this point. I just wanted to show you what it can look like. And now I'm just going to wrap it around my branch. And then you can also add like some buttons and like some nice little pieces of ephemera. You can add appliques, anything you'd like to embellish this. You can tie it up and then you can leave it on display. You can hang it in your craft room, wherever you'd like. I think this turned out so pretty. Let me know what you think down below. So I have some more long fabric strips here. I also am going to take another piece of embroidery thread, cutting that and setting it aside. Now with these strips, all I'm going to do is take these nice long strands. I'm not going to worry about what they look like at this point. All I'm doing is wrapping it around my fingers, and I'm going to mix up my colors and my patterns and some of my textures here. If there's any bulky ends, I'm just going to trim those off, and then I'm going to just continue to go through all my different fabrics and wrap them around my fingers until I get a really nice thick bundle. This is a great way to get rid of any of those odd pieces that are really long, but you're not sure really what to use them for. This is a project for this. I am actually going to make pom-poms. I thought it would be kind of a cool thing. I have seen it before and I've never tried it, so I really wanted to give this a whirl. And I have to say it actually works really, really well. So once you got the desired loops that you want, I'm going to then take my twine and wrap it around the middle of our bundle like you see me doing here, just like you would if this was yarn. I'm going to trim that off, again pulling as tight as possible without breaking your string. I'm going to tie a knot just like you see me doing here, and then you're going to take the tip of your scissors and get them underneath those loops and cut through those loops to separate all the strands of fabric. It does take a little bit of wiggling, but once you get your little scissor tip underneath there, you can just go ahead and cut through that. Once you've cut through all those loops, you can then fluff it up a bit. And I am actually going to give this a haircut just to even it out a little bit because it was looking a little too uneven for my liking. But you can make a bunch of these and turn it into a garland, or you could use these as a vase filler or in a bowl. I am making 2 of these. I'm going to do another one off camera so and then I'm going to show you what the two of them look like together, but you can just put them on display anywhere. I just thought it was just a fun and unique piece to use in your craft room, on display in a room, anywhere that you'd like. I just love how easy it was and how easy it was to just burn through a bunch of these fabric scraps. I had this canvas pouch in my stash from my local dollar store. It is 9 inches by 6.3 inches in dimensions, and you can see it's got a zipper. Now, I just want you to know, I am not somebody who sews, so having a pre-made pouch like this was perfect for me. I'm just going to remove any loose threads that there might be, but you can see it's just a really simple, basic pouch. I wanted to get rid of that fold line that's in the middle, so I am going to iron that out. I'm just using my mini press, but of course use a basic iron, adding a little bit of water to just help get rid of it, because this fabric was a little on the stiff side, and that fold line was not coming out just with a basic iron without the water. I'm going to be using some fusible interfacing from Dollar Tree. I wanted to give this stuff a try. All I'm going to do right now is just measure out by using my pouch on the fusible interfacing, and I'm just folding it so I've got a piece that'll cover the entire pouch, and I'm just going to cut it down with my scissors. There's no exact science to this at this point. I'm just roughly coming up with the size that I need for my pouch. So as you can see, I've got another big pile of some smaller scraps. So all I'm going to do is follow the instructions on the packaging for our fusible interfacing. I've got like the rough side pointing up, and I'm placing these fabric pieces down on that rough surface. That is where the adhesive is. So if you are somebody like me who doesn't sew, this is perfect for you. All you have to do is lay out your fabric pieces onto this, and then it is going to glue it into place once we add heat. So I'm just going to randomly place all these different scraps here and there until I get a look that I am happy with. So I am going to be using my mini heat press again. You can do this with an iron or a larger heat press, but follow the instructions, and then all you have to do is apply heat, and then you're going to apply moderate pressure and allow that adhesive to adhere to the fabric. It's going to bond it all together, and then you don't have to worry about sewing, although you could sew if you want. I am going to be adding a little bit of stitching here and there, but it's going to be done by hand, not with my sewing machine. I'm just going to go ahead and continue to just work in sections, and then I will show you what it looks like when it's completely covered. Okay, so I've got my entire piece all covered. Doesn't it look so pretty? And now I can use this to cover my pouch. So if there's any spots where it may be lifting, you can go ahead and just use your fabric glue and tack it down. I did notice that some spots just were layered too much, and so there was no adhesion between the fusible interfacing and the fabric. So I just went ahead and just tacked those down with my fabric glue. So now I'm going to lay out my pouch, and I need to trim off any of the excess. I'm creating a straight line with my pencil and ruler, making sure that I have a little bit of an edge. This would be considered a seam allowance if you actually were sewing. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my scissors and cut off the excess, and I'm going to do that with the other side as well, and I'm also going to do that to the top and the bottom. And of course, if you're like me, you can set the scraps aside for another project. So I'm just measuring my pouch size just so I know where from the fold line that I created to trim off the excess so that the top edge lines up with the bottom edge of the zipper. So I just want to also mention that my pouch is not sewn perfectly. It is definitely very uneven, but that is okay. I'm going to be adding some trim just to hide that. Here I just folded over that top edge, and then I knew exactly where I needed to trim off that excess. Again, I had already created a fold line at the bottom that wraps around our pouch, and that's how I knew exactly where I needed to trim that part off. So before I went any further, I decided to add some stitching, just some hand stitching. I'm using some embroidery floss and a tapestry needle. I'm using colors that complement the fabrics that I have. I've got this yellow, and I'm not using a full strand of my embroidery floss. I'm actually going to split it up so that there's 3 strands. That way here it's not going to be too bulky, and I'm just going to do some different random stitches. So to start off with the yellow, I decided to just do a few X's here and there, and I just kind of scattered like little clusters all around. And then I also did some just some basic straight stitches, but I kept them nice and straight, but I did them kind of randomly here and there, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like here in just a moment. But just really simple basic stitches. This is known as slow stitching, and it is a really popular thing right now. It is actually really nice and relaxing. This is a great project for that. You can see how all those basic stitches look there. Now I am going to do some basic stitches, but I'm going to do them all sporadically. It kind of looks like scattered seeds. I guess you can call it seed stitching. So I'm going to just go ahead and do clusters of those here and there. You can embellish this with some appliques. You can also embellish this with buttons or lace, whatever you'd like, but I just wanted to keep mine nice and simple and just added a little bit of stitching here, there, and there. So now that the stitching is done, I am going to now trim off any of the excess and start to adhere my fabric to my pouch. But there is going to be one more important thing that I need to do. First off, I'm going to trim off the bottom corners because I didn't want there to be any bulk on there once I adhere it. So I'm going to just trim off both corners on an angle. I should have done this sooner, but now I decided to go ahead and just press down that bottom edge just to make sure that I have a nice crisp crease there. So I knew where the center was. Now I'm going to put my pouch into place to make sure everything is lining up. Like I said, I should have done this sooner, but thankfully everything was coming together really well. Now, if you're a sewer, then I'm sure you know other ways of doing this, but since I'm not, this is what I'm going to do. I am putting pieces of cardboard inside my pouch because there was no protective lining on the inside, and the glue is going to soak through and glue those 2 pieces together, or the insides together. So it's extremely important that you put a protective barrier in there. I'm applying my glue all over one side of our patchwork, and I'm going to put that into place, but I'm going to show you this glue actually did not work well at all with the fusible interfacing. I was actually really bummed, but I'm going to just show you this process anyways. Again, just applying glue on one side and putting it into place, and then once it was fully dry, I noticed it was lifting and I was able to pull it off no problem. So I'm like, okay, well, that's disappointing. Thankfully, I had some Gorilla fabric glue in my stash, and I know this works really well. I've used it on some outdoor projects. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to just rip this off and start again. And so I'm just going to go ahead and apply some globs of this glue here and there. And then I'm also going to go ahead and spread it out just using either a piece of cardboard or a plastic card. I usually like to use a plastic card. And then I noticed I still didn't have enough adhesive, so I went ahead and added some more, just more globs here and there. And just so you know, this glue sets up quite quickly as well. And it does have an odor, so you need to have a well-ventilated room, and you also need to work quickly with this glue. So again, just spreading it out, and then I'm going to press it into place, smoothing it out so there's good adhesion between the interfacing and the pouch. And then I'm going to allow it to dry well, and I'm adding just a little bit of glue here just to tack down that little piece of fabric that was lifting. But I will do that with both sides of our pouch. And I have to say, I'm pulling on it and it is not coming up after it has cured. So to work on the sides of the pouch, you can see I've got our what's called seam allowance here. I'm going to just wrap the one edge around the side, and I'm just going to use some hot glue to glue that edge into place. So I'm just going to start either end, it doesn't really matter, adding just a thin bead of hot glue along right up against the edge, and I'm going to wrap that around. And I'm going to do that all the way up to the zipper. I'm going to be doing the same procedure on both sides. So now I'm going to add some glue again, and I'm folding over the other edge. But as you can see, it's not completely wrapped around because I'm going to be trimming off that excess so that the seam is right on the edge of our pouch. I didn't want the seam to be showing on the front or on the back side, just so it stays right on the edge. So again, like I said, I did that with the other side as well. I'm just adding some hot glue to glue down the top edge. It was lifting because I didn't spread out my glue all the way across. Here I'm going to trim off that excess fabric that's on the edge. It's removing that seam allowance, and then you can see how actually quite nice that it looks. I think it turned out really well. If you're concerned about fraying, which I was a little bit with some of these fabrics, I'm just going to be going in and just adding just a little bit of fabric glue along the edge. This one, you don't see it at all once it dries, which is really nice, but you can see it turned out really, really pretty. So again, like I'd mentioned before, I am going to be adding a little bit of trim along the edge because my top is not even around the zipper. I had this scrap trim. I don't even know what it's from, but you can see it was cut off from something. And all I'm going to do is just wiggle my glue gun back and forth so that it creates a nice wide strip of some hot glue. That's the width of our trim. You can see me shaking there, but it's just applying a nice wider strip of the hot glue so that that trim will be pressed into place and will be held in place really well. I'm actually curious, what is your favorite fabric glue? I know a lot of people like Fabri-Tac. I actually haven't tried Fabri-Tac before, but let me know what is your favorite. Okay, so now I'm going to add some little mini pom-pom trim. I just decided to go into my stash of trims, and I thought it would be just a really cute embellishment. I think it turned out so good. I can't wait to use this pouch. So the only thing left is to open our pouch up and remove those pieces of cardboard or plastic, whatever protective barrier had inside. You can see nothing stuck together, which is awesome. It's ready to be used. I love how this turned out. It's going to be a great place to store some art supplies. I have so many more fabric scrap ideas for you to check out in this video right here. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Let me know what your favorite project was, and we will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.